Welcome, everyone. We'll start out with comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda.
Hi, I'm Noah Everett. I'm co-president, special educator and a co-president of the SBA. And
Noah, can I ask a quick question? Is this related to negotiations, or would you prefer it? Okay, thank you.
And we thought we'd come out here tonight because we as professionals will celebrate our opening of school on Friday, but we wanted to take a moment to welcome the public and the board to a new school year and the goals and hopes that we have for that, which we want to extend with you, which is to support the learning of South Burlington students in the community and promote the field of education and specifically public education. The board has set some goals as well for the year that we've seen, and we want to offer our support with those as well, including communicating things to the public, the grand endeavor that we're just starting, as well as looking at how we're going to measure those end policies and how we can show what students have learned. I think that my colleagues are really well situated to talk about how that happens and the kinds of things that our students are doing, which are really impressive. So we just came out tonight to bring that message that we hope that you guys have a successful year with us and that we can support you and in turn be led by you in a positive way for us and for the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Noah. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing everybody at Convocation on Friday, and we also will officially welcome everyone back then and wish everyone a great year and look forward to moving our public school system forward. Thank you all. All right, David, any other comments from the public? Sorry. All right, seeing none. Any amendments to the agenda?
Yeah, we have two. We're going to remove from action items 15 and 16. Those will turn to discussion only. This is consider the line of credit on the master planning, and item 16, consider the resolution for declaration of the official internet reimbursement component.
Okay, and if I could add to that, David, we did get a communication from a couple of community members earlier today. The board received the communication that was challenging open meeting law regarding the action items that were on the agenda tonight. And I did want to provide a little bit of clarity and thank you for making the recommendation that those be put on for discussion only versus action tonight. The VSA, by state statute, we are required to notify the public of public meetings in 3 different venues. And we do that at City Hall, at Hannaford's, I think.
Shelburne Road, and Price Chopper on, Williston Road.
Yeah, and the other, by state statute, we are also obligated to notify folks of our meetings and our agendas on whatever the official district website is. So apparently, in this particular case, this particular agenda made it onto the district website's calendar. It did not make it under the tab that is called School Board. And I do think some community members look exclusively at the School Board tab when they look at agenda items. So even though that isn't a requirement by law, because some community members may not have had adequate notification, because that did not make it on within what would have been 48-hour requirement for open meeting law, we are moving those items from action to discussion for this evening, and then we'll make sure they're appropriately warned for a future meeting. Yeah. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move to announcements. Cole, how are you doing?
So at the high school, Slam Leader Retreat is tomorrow and Friday. Slam Leaders are upperclassmen who get paired with a freshman advisory and help facilitate the group's development through activities and community service. New Student Orientation Day is August 26th, and the school day ends at 1 p.m. for those students. August 27th is the first day of school for all students throughout all of the schools. And picture days at the high school are August 27th and 28th. At the middle school, like the high school, they have a 6th graders coming in a day earlier than the other grades on August 26th. And Tuttle's Meet the Coaches night is August 27th at 6 in the Tuttle cafeteria. And their picture day is Friday, August 30th. At Chamberlain, their open house is August 26th from 1:30 to 3 for families to meet their teachers. Rick Marcotte is also having their open house that day. Kindergarten families are from 11:30 to 12:45, and all other grades are from 1:30 to 3. Orchard is also having their open house that day, and theirs is from 8:15 to 9:15 a.m. For, like I said before, all elementary schools, their first day of school is August 27th. And at the district level, master planning and visioning, parent and guardian user group meetings are August 26th and 28th at 7 p.m. in this room, the Tuttle Library. And then, if I can move to the junior rep report. So I have emailed Mr. Burke, and right now I just wanted to run the timeline by you guys.
Great.
So what I had in mind was that we would start advertising the position the last day before Labor Day, so that way students would have the long weekend to start thinking about it, which is August 30th, and have all applications be due September 16th by the end of the school day. So that way they would have time to fill out the application, and then that would give us a week to look over applications and contact the candidates about interviews. And so that would give us, I believe, that following week in September to have those interviews. And so I just wanted to see if that would work for you guys.
That works.
All right.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for organizing that.
Yeah.
Any other announcements?
I think you hit the earlier ones. Obviously, this week has been busy with new staff orientation, new teachers. So administrators and staff have been busy welcoming them, and that obviously culminates, as you said earlier, with a welcome back at convocation on Friday, starting at 8:30 or 8 with kind of just gathering and 8:30 start time. So we're looking forward to it. Things are coming together, so we're excited for the start.
Good.
Thank you, Cole.
All right. Seeing nothing else, move on to agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So I don't have anything else to report. We have a meeting tomorrow with the city. This is our ongoing city-school collaboration. This is between both chairs and myself and Kevin Dorn. That meeting is set up for tomorrow. We'll be going over just kind of where things are and anything new between city and school. We do know that I have to solidify the next steering committee meeting. I know that because that was a note that came out of our last meeting was going to be around, I had a note actually confirmed with others that it was around the 28th of August. So we'll have to set that. That is not currently a date that we've worked on or decided on. So I'll have to find that out. Other than that, we're good.
All right. Superintendent's report.
So we have 3 items here. Again, some of these are, redundant and unchanged from the last meeting we had. First is the Chamberlain School Noise Mitigation situation at Chamberlain. L&N, which is a contracted service that was contracted by Jones Payne Group through the FAA. They did file their report to the Jones Payne Group, and Jones Payne has received it, and they'll be coming back to us soon around what the accommodations and recommendations will be and next steps. Again, Gary has been really overseeing that particular portion, and I don't think there's anything else beyond that, Gary?
Nothing.
Good, yeah. The Rick Marcotte Central School, or 180 Market, again, I think we want to be careful about just saying 180 Market Street, because we want to say our Rick Marcotte Central School and the new building, which will be 180 Market Street, is moving forward. And Gary can maybe give a little bit of an update. We've got a little bit of an update as of today around some of the entrance, an entrance area that we want to make sure people are clear about.
Yes, it's relatively straightforward. Over the next 2 days, they will be expanding the entrance road for about the first 50 feet, 7 feet to the east, and paving that area, because on Monday, the 26th, was the only available date to dig a required geothermal test well. So they will be using, and that's directly to the west of the entrance road. So they'll cone off about 3 or 4 feet on the west side of that road, but they're expanding at 7 feet, so there's still two-way traffic and a little more space there than there is right now.
Okay, Gary's been working with the city, that was certainly a conversation. And we're recognizing, this is all startup of school year, open house, so it's, to get it done is fine, and we're really hoping to have that not be an ongoing thing. We want that to be available, so.
Yeah, and just on a quick note to there, thanks to Justin Rabideau and the city for the paving coat that's on the Market Street past the Central School entrance, because I've traveled that a few times without paving, and it's a lot nicer now.
Yeah, it's an enjoyable, short little drive down, right?
Yeah,
Much better than it was.
without losing my
Right.
spots.
Right. And so then the last part here for me is the allowable tuition rate. I did include a letter in the information to you. It's really in a report. It is within the 3% increment. And so I do, if you would like to take that off and talk about that, you certainly can, but I'm recommending that we stay with the allowable tuition and don't recap the $72 because it's within the 3%. So that's again, an area I just wanted to make note of.
Any board feedback on tuition rate?
I was just trying to remember how many tuition students we have here. Do you have a ballpark?
Yeah, I don't have the official number. I don't know that Patrick does either. We are just south of 200 students. Is that right, Patrick? Tuition students? Do you have a
I can
firm count?
take a look at.
No, it's all right. Now,
Ballpark's good.
we're in that 200 ballpark.
We have over 40 freshmen coming.
Yeah, and we have, for the first time, we have 7th and 8th graders coming to us too that are included in this count because of the Act 46 merger in the islands.
Yeah.
And so I don't actually know, is it around 15? And not quite, 7 to 15, yeah. So we have,
No, that's
we're
great,
picking
yeah.
up students, and again, some of these numbers are changing, as we approach this first week of school. Mhm.
Thanks.
All right. Seeing nothing else, we'll move on to agenda item 8. We're a little bit early, but master planning and visioning.
That's good. So let me, again, we've been working with Dorr and Whittier, and we're happy to have Lee Dorr and Roberto Fitzgerald with us from Dorr and Whittier. Sorry about that. And again, we've been working with them through phase 1, and we're in phase 2. There's been a working group that has been meeting regularly. Bridget's been part of that. Patrick and Karsten. Brian has been at some of those. Myself, Gary. Help me out, guys. Who else am I missing? Yeah, some of the other high school at times, and obviously Dorr and Whittier. But we have been moving through the process. You will find a handout that actually walks through some of the kind of the analysis, and the presentation that you have here is what Lee and Roberto are going to go through. The intent of this meeting is really just to give you some information. This is an information meeting. Obviously, parents and community members have the opportunity to ask questions too, with the idea that we would move to the 4th of September to be able, for the board to be able to give a more specific direction and focus for us. So without further ado, we have a presentation from Dorr and Whittier, again, with the idea to catch you up and the public up on where we are. So Lee, Roberto, welcome.
Great, thank you for having us tonight. So as David mentioned, this is a follow-up from our last board meeting where we were trying to, with broad strokes, outline in this pre-bond option the 5 concepts that we have based on the charge from the board for looking at a new middle school and high school. So this is an update to that. We have those 5 concepts. Each of those 5 concepts has varying scope, and we've placed these buildings on different locations on the site. What we're updating you on at this meeting is we've examined in detail construction durations and phasing, how we actually would build these concepts on our campus. And we've got some level of magnitude cost estimates, so you can kind of compare these options amongst themselves. So this is the existing site you guys are all more than familiar with. So we'll jump right into what we're calling Concept 1. This is a new high school, and let me start. The existing high school square footage is up in that top right corner. Your existing high school currently has 151,500 square feet. The existing middle school is at 120,500 square feet. What we've been working on, and you guys have some of the detail on those 11 by 17 sheets in front of you over the summer, is we started with during the feasibility study of a feasibility study level program of spaces. And what we've done over the past 2 months is we've taken a much deeper dive. We've met with user groups from both the high school and the middle school, and our work with the staff to come up with what we call space summaries. And that is a listing of every single space within the school and what its square footage would be. And we've worked through kind of adjacencies and relationships of those programs. And so that's what we've built this on. So this is, updates to everything that we've done during the study. And there's a few moving parts and changes, and we're going to highlight those. But this initial concept builds a new high school just to the east of the middle school, back on the varsity baseball field. There is what we're calling a wellness center, which is a physical education space. It includes space for a competition 200-meter indoor running track. And within that box that we're calling Wellness Center, we've taken all of the program related to PE spaces, movement studios, locker rooms, related bathrooms, gym courts, and we've taken all of that and put it into that box to try and make it as efficient as possible, where we have the oval for the 200-meter track. So this new plan project is 125,000 square feet is the new middle school program space for grades 6 through 8. The high school program is grown from your current 151,500 to 195,500, and that's also dealing with increased enrollment from what you have now to take care of the space crunch that you're in, as well as better organizing programs and getting adequate space to be able to cover what you need. So this total project campus, grades 6 through 12, would encompass about 405,000 square feet. To actually accomplish this, the construction duration would last in total about 5 years and 2 months in this concept. And generally, we have a little more detail on this schedule. The design phase on any of these options, from a positive vote by the community moving forward, is about an 11-month process for us to get documents ready to go out to bid to contractors. And then the schedule changes depending on the concept. So this phase 1, we would be building the new high school, and that's about a 24-month construction duration. We'd build that new high school, and then we would move the high school students into that space, which would free up the existing high school, and you can see that underneath here. When the high school is empty, we're going to move the middle school students from the middle school over to the high school, which will free up and empty out the middle school. And as you can see, we're building right on top of that footprint. So there's a middle school out front along Dorset Street, and here's all of that kind of PE and athletic program space. To accomplish this, as you can imagine, with school up and running, it's very sequential projects. You got to build that new high school, get it all buttoned up, turnkey, ready to move in, and move kids in. And you got to move kids over. That takes a long time to be able to do. There's a lot of mobilization, remobilization with the contractor, and moving stuff around. So that's where you get into these phases of moving kids around. The construction period to build the new wellness center and middle school is about a 28-month process. That's phase 3. And then there's the move of demolishing the existing high school, completing the fields that will go into place, and cleaning up the parking. Total is 5 years and 2 months. There's an estimated project cost of $208.4 million on this. And I'm going to go into these costs in more detail later to get closer to each other. A couple of things to point out. In this, the high school students would be able to move into a new building in May of 2023. The middle school would be moving into their new building in October of 2025. And so we'll have highlighted those dates on each of these options moving forward. Concept 2, this is looking at just doing a renovation to the existing middle school. So it's that infrastructure only that we've been talking about. We would be building a new high school again in this, attached to the new wellness center, including the PE space for the high school. And in this piece, to be able to fit those two next to each other, we had to build on top of the existing track. So you'd have to, replace that and make a new track next door to it. The existing middle school would get renovated. We would use the high school as swing space to move them in. And this is much different than some of the stuff we looked at during the study options where we had trailers rolling in and we all decided that wasn't a good idea. So we were looking for more wholesale moves to be able to have a full building to move kids and vacate them out of. Some highlights on here, things to know. If we're just doing the infrastructure, we're not making any educational space improvements at the middle school. In this particular option, we're creating the bus loop and drive over on the north side of the site coming off of Dorset Street. The wellness center, again, I mentioned, is nice and close access to the fields. And we're creating basically a buffer zone along Dorset Street, which includes a green belt with play field. So instead of buildings, it's green space along Dorset Street, which is different than some of the other options. One thing to note, we did find when we were going through the program, when we looked at just doing infrastructure only at the middle school, one thing that's just woefully short programmatically is PE space at the middle school. So attached with this infrastructure only at the middle school is a small addition to be able to house a new gym for the middle school. That's at 18,000 square feet. So that makes this a little bit larger at 418,500 square feet. And the reason it's larger is your existing middle school is a little bit larger than what our program is. So when we take that, and we're not moving any walls to make it more efficient, but we're just adding a high school program to it. To construct this, it's about 4 years and 5 months. It's a little bit less scope, but there's still a lot of phasing moves back and forth. The detail on that, again, this one is a little bit less at $201.9 million, but again, this is a considerable scope difference. This is a renovated middle school versus an all-new middle school. Design phase stays the same at 11 months. To build the new high school and wellness center, we'd be building both of those at the same time and some of this related parking. That's a 28-month schedule for phase 1. High school students would be able to move into the new building in September of 2023. At which time the existing high school is vacant now because they're in the new building. We move the middle school kids over and we do the renovations there. And then we do the move again once we're complete with the renovations and demo the high school, complete fields and parking. So again, it's a long process, 4 months, 5 years on this one. Option 3 is again looking at just doing an infrastructure only project with the middle school, with that gym addition I mentioned, and just the new high school. And so one of the differences here, since there isn't the PE wellness center, this is just the new high school, we're able to fit that without encroaching on the existing track. Here's the new gym attached to the middle school, and middle and high school are attached together. We've changed obviously the parking and some of the play fields around. And what we were trying to do is, one of the suggestions by the board was look for options in a couple of instances where we keep the existing stadium where it is, and we try and save some of this wooded area out front along Dorset Street. So this was a concept developed to try and, take that on directly. The next option, just getting into the schedule on this, to build that phase 1, just the high school and related parking, it's 26 months, a little bit less than it was when we had the wellness center attached to it as well. It's the same moving the kids around as in the other options. It takes several moves to be able to get that to happen. And again, that construction duration, 4 years, 3 months. This is $184.6 million. And again, this is renovated middle school. Concept 4 was another look. One of the things when we met with the city and looking through kind of what the zoning related issues are along Dorset Street, where they're trying to create more of an urban streetscape presence, one of the zoning requirements here is to be able to have more of a physical presence with buildings along Dorset Street. So this concept was developed to be able to follow along with that. This is a new middle school, a new high school. It's got the new PE Wellness Center. It's 403,000 square feet, and it's a little bit less than the other one we showed you at 405. The reason for that is what we're trying to take advantage of here is, we've kind of showed it a little bit. What we're trying to do is have one kitchen to be able to support the students at both schools. Each school would have its own separate dining cafeteria area, but it's one kitchen to try and be able to take some economy of scale. We also would be sharing a physical plant, boiler room, et cetera, in this. So there's some consolidation there and some efficiency. So it's a little bit less square footage than Concept 1, for instance. Some considerations to look at. This is a particularly long construction duration. 5 years and 10 months. There's multiple moves when we're building a new high school out in the parking lot, and we're building a new middle school over the existing high school and the wellness center over the existing middle school. So as you can imagine, that's a little bit more complicated in the construction aspects of it, and takes a little longer to accomplish. And again, in this one, the outdoor track was able to remain where it is currently. The schedule on that, Phase 1 would be building that new high school and some of the related parking in the back. It's about a 24-month construction schedule. High school students would be able to move in around July of 2023. And the middle school would be able to move into their building in April 2024. Again, you can see the durations of some of these phases are a little bit longer than what you saw earlier, and that's because we have 2 cases where we're building over existing footprints. The last concept that we're looking at right now is Concept 5, and this, again, is all new middle school, new high school, new PE Wellness Center. And this was an attempt to look at a concept that could get built all at once without disturbing ongoing operations at the school. So the idea here is we'd basically separate the existing site and cut it in half, and so your existing school functions would happen as they usually do. The back of the half of this site would be turned over to the contractor, and they'd get everything at once. So it's a lot of economy for them as far as efficiency and speed of construction. And again, this also takes care of some of that consolidation opportunity with sharing kitchen and physical plant, and so it's a little bit less square footage than some of the other options. This is the fastest construction schedule. This could have everything completed 3 years and 8 months. So it has the least impact to educational disruption during construction. Given that being said, we have had to move that existing stadium. We've relocated it out near Dorset Street, right in that other piece of wooded area that you were looking for us to save. So we've tried to maximize some of the opportunities on the site, looking to try and gain some efficiencies. Construction duration is directly tied to cost, and it's directly tied to educational impact. So we were looking for something that would minimize both of those. The total cost of this is similar to some of the other options that have the full scope at $209.6 million. 32 months for the construction phase for everything. And then once we move everybody into new buildings, then we got to do abatement and demolition of the 2 existing buildings and replace the fields and parking. So it's much faster than the other one. Looking at all these together, it gives you kind of a sense of how they stack up next to each other. An interesting thing to look at here when you start to analyze this is in Concept 3, which is our real baseline project, that's new high school and just fix up the infrastructure at the middle school. It's $184.6 million. All of the other options have similar scope, but different durations because we're building them in different places on the site. But they're all pretty grouped together, right around that 208 number. And it's interesting because it lets you see realistically how much the construction duration impacts cost. So one question that we may have, for those of you who remember back when you guys made the decision on option 8, let me try it this way first. If we look at that baseline project, which is kind of the minimal charge by the board to move forward, was the high school and renovate the middle school, $184.5 million. If we consider that kind of like the baseline project, what are the incremental costs in addition to add some of these things that we've been talking about? So we've kind of gone through the cost estimates to pull this stuff out. If you take that base at 184.5 and you say, we want to add the new wellness center, we've isolated that cost in square footage. So that's about a $17.2 million add. And that was a question that came up at the last meeting. On top of that, if we looked at a new middle school instead of, in lieu of, the infrastructure renovation, it's an additional $6.4 million in an option where we can build it all at once. So that's option 5, concept 5. So you can see going from a renovated middle school, which we're not touching any of the educational spaces, to getting what you want, that incremental difference, because we can build it all at once in that option, it's a $6.4 million change between a renovation versus all new construction. The other piece to look at is the duration. And concept 5 is more expensive by $1.5 million, but it gets you potentially into the building 2 years earlier than some of the other options. And weighing that cost versus educational disruption is something to take into consideration. So this slide was actually a slide from the feasibility study when the board made that decision to go new middle school and high school. And at that time, we had estimated new construction for just a middle school and a high school to be somewhere between $173 and $178 million. And you see our current baseline project right now is at 184.5. So what happened? Why did that cost go up? Because they're not completely the same project. So option 8 during the study was at $173 million, and we developed those costs in January, presented them publicly in April of 2018. The current cost estimate for that same project, new middle school and high school, which is our concept 5 currently, less the wellness center. We know how much the wellness center costs at $17.3 million. So you take that off the total of, and you get $192.3. So it's a $19.3 million increase from the conceptual option 8 that we looked at. And the reasons for that is we had to make an assumption when we did the last estimate because we didn't know when you guys were going to vote the project. So we just drew a line in the sand and said we're going to base all of our assumptions on a construction start of September 2020. Well, we're not going to hit that because we've changed the schedule a little bit. But what we're assuming now is an April 2021 construction start. And so we have to factor in escalation in the construction market. So 8 months of escalation, currently escalation is between 5% and 6% per year. So on a project of this magnitude, it's $9.5 million just an escalation for a year delay. It is something to think about when we're thinking of any of these options with projects. They're big numbers, and escalation causes some big impacts to it the longer those drag out. The other thing that changed is the combined middle school, high school program, option 8 during the study was 355,000 square feet. And I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot more in-depth work with staff, and our program currently is at 365,000 square feet. It's about 10,000 square feet more. It's a $4 million add. Didn't meet the program needs that we want. We've also looked a lot closer at city regulations. One of the stipulations with city zoning is that we earmark and budget a certain percentage of construction cost, and it's graduated incrementally. Our project, as it stands right now, would require us to spend $1.5 million on landscaping, specifically trees and shrubs. So that's something we should have a conversation with the city with. But from a budgeting standpoint, I just want you guys to know we did include it in there because that's the best information we have. We've also done, over the summer, some preliminary investigation of soils on the site. And so we've gone out and dug test pits where we've been proposing some of these concepts. And what we found is, let's back up and I can show you where. What we found is we've dug test pits all along the back half of the site here. Everything over here is pretty good soil. there was a line back in 1968 when they built the high school. There was the cut and fill line, where this was all, you know, a big ravine going back down to the swamp, and they've brought in a bunch of fill to be able to make for those play fields back there. It's not really conducive to good soils for building on, so we know we're gonna have to take some bad stuff out and bring in some structural fill or change the foundation design to build where we want to back there. That was about $1 million ad that we are informed of by doing some of that preliminary soils investigation. So that's that. And because we had to build on the outdoor stadium, there's a $3 million cost to, from a budget standpoint, to replace that. So that shows you where that delta was of where we were during feasibility study. A few things have changed, but it's about a $19 million change, and that's where the changes resulted from. So some things to be thinking about when you guys are analyzing this, and these go back to, you know, some of the same stuff we looked at during the feasibility study to kind of hone in on option A. The same things apply. You know, education is primary. You know, do these concepts satisfy the presented educational goals that have been developed? Does the concept that we advanced moving forward, does it support student wellness and student health? Site, which is the best location for it? And, you know, there's certainly some differing views on that, of building a presence all along Dorset Street versus building, you know, in Concept 5 on the back of the site. And I'll just say, anecdotally, from a school designer's perspective, we typically, we use principles that are called crime prevention through environmental design. And those standards for schools are, you want long sight lines coming into a building so that school staff and administrators have a much more time to react to who's coming into the site, sequencing of entry, keeping stuff right off the street from where people are driving by. It gives some buffer zone. So from our planning standpoint, we always see it as a benefit, if you can on a site, to try and build more towards the rear of the site from a safety standpoint. So these are some things to think about, and we'll have to balance that out with, you know, city zoning needs and their desire to have stuff up in the front, and we'll have to have those conversations. The other thing is, you know, which best supports community use. You know, certain elements of the scope that we've been talking about certainly have some community enhancements that could work versus some of the other options, stuff that needs to be thought about. This is a big one, logistics and construction impact. And you guys saw, you know, the big durations, discrepancy between some of these. And, you know, thinking of the student of, you know, starting their high school career, and some of those options are 5 years. They could be living through their entire career, you know, in a construction zone. It happens, and we've done lots of projects where we have to do that, but it's just stuff, more things to think about. Cost, you know, considering the value added and, you know, long-term benefits for students in the community of one option or the other. All good questions, all hard things to kind of grapple with. And this is what we're going to be looking to try and come to a decision point on, hopefully at your next meeting on September 4th. So we have one option to be able to focus in on, develop that further, and be able to come back to you instead of some of the cartoon drawings that we have now, with something more tangible and saying, this is what that 400,000 square feet looks like in relation to the number of spaces that are in there. This is how it fits in the site. This is what it looks like architecturally. And we can develop, you know, some firmer cost estimates once we have some things, you know, to estimate and count. So this is just kind of an update of where we're at, and we're here to do as much as we can to field questions that you and the community may have prior to making a decision moving forward.
One question I have, Lee, well, I have a lot of questions, but when we last met, your indication of the indoor track was going to be incremental to the gym space that had been planned in the initial concepts. So
Yes.
this seems, I get, maybe in my head I was thinking it would be sort of incremental square footage, and the implication I got from the last meeting is it was not going to be that much more because there was some efficiencies of putting things inside the track.
Yep.
But I'm looking at your number of like 17 or 19 million. Can you can you reconcile for me sort of what was incremental to the gym space that was planned in the original concept designs and this indoor? Now you're
Sure.
calling it a wellness center, but I think it's incorporating the indoor
Yep.
track, correct?
The best way to illustrate it is in this concept 3. And if you look at the new high school program square footage, it's 240, right? So we don't have a wellness center in this option, right? So all of the normally attributable PE space for a high school is encapsulated in that 240,000 square feet. That changes when we went over to option 5. Now you'll see from 240, that dropped down to 195 because we pulled the physical ed components out of the high school program and said, out of those, how can we fill up this when we draw a box around that track? You know, you got the oval in the middle, right? That's the empty donut hole. What do we put in there? Because we have to pay to put a roof around that and ancillary around that. So we said locker rooms, gym spaces, movement studios, those types of things. We're going to pull that out of the high school program and we're going to put it into the wellness program. So what you guys asked me last time, what is the net increase in square footage to add that indoor track? And so that was 43,000 square feet.
44, you just had
Oh, I just had it.
44.5.
Yep. So it's an additional
There it is.
44,500 net square feet to be able to have the 200-meter track, in addition to all of our normal PE components. So
And-
that translates directly to $17.3 million additional cost for that 43,000 square feet. Does that
Okay,
answer
so,
your
I mean,
question?
order of magnitude, it's about twice what would have been at the high school. I guess I was under the impression there was gonna be
An offset.
something like 10% or something, but, again, that was just my impression. And so that incremental cost is not only the square footage, but the kind of markup associated with the construction delay and so forth. Okay. That was one question. Okay. That's a lot of discussion. I think one of the things I'd be interested in, and I suspect all of us would be, is if you go back to the considerations slide you had, do you have responses from your perspective as to which options address these considerations?
I think it really becomes a decision that when you have to look at each of them and then kind of run through, and I don't want to speak for the working group because we've had some of that conversation even when we met this morning about, you know, which option does, you know, the group that we've been embedded in for the last, you know, year and a half on this, what do they think? And I don't, Bridget and David and Patrick, you were there.
Yeah, the poll of the working group, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, I think your hand was up too, was that, you know, concept 5 has everything in it that we would want for the educational aspects of the project, for student wellness. It's the best location for the buildings, really, in terms of safety, in terms of construction timing, and all of those things. It is the most expensive, and we understand that. But in terms of what you would want from an educational perspective, this is sort of everything, and that was really the straw poll around the table, I think, this morning, is option 5. And I was hoping that Pat might speak a little bit to the wellness center versus just the regular PE spaces in the high school, and sort of, you know, his perspective on that a little bit.
I'd be happy to, well, I mean, I think it's important in terms of looking at that wellness center to really take a half step back and look at the data that we have relative, specific to our kids, but also that we know about America and just kind of youth in America, and as well as adults, and that is that there's an epidemic. There's an obesity epidemic. There's a movement epidemic. There are issues that are directly affecting the health and well-being of our citizens. And, I think there's like a lot of different angles to the increased healthcare costs that we talk about. And there's a fair amount of research out there that talks about prevention and how, really in looking at what's happening in our country. And specific to South Burlington, for example, you might be surprised to know that like only 32% of our middle school students are engaged in physical activity every day, 7 days a week. And 60% are 5 out of 7 days. But when they get to high school, despite the fact that we have a more robust athletic program, those numbers actually drop to 19% of the high school students are active every day, and 49% are active 5 out of 7 days. And those are well below what the Academy of Pediatrics is recommending, what the Center for Disease Prevention is recommending. And so we obviously have to shift the culture, and that's for me where this becomes very central to our educational mission. And a lot of this is well known, well accepted, well researched around the connection between physical health and mental health, physical health and academic success. What having a physical education space like that for us and the access that our students would have during the school day would do is completely reboot our entire physical education program. And what we would do with, what we would end up doing is really starting to imagine a physical education program that was launching students into the next phase. And so if you think about how adults, including college-aged adults, so like our student, we have I forget the exact percentage, but we have a high percentage of our students who are student athletes at the high school, over 30%. But the number of those student athletes who continue to be student athletes in college is much, much lower, single digits. So even as students are leaving our system, they're going to interact with their physical wellness differently. And so what our physical education program would turn into is that more akin to how adults and young adults interact with physical activity. So setting goals. I want to get in shape. I want to lose weight. I want to run a 5K. I want to, etc. Move. And so it would completely reboot our physical education program during the school day. We only require a credit, a year and a half of phys ed right now at the high school. That would immediately change to a 4-year requirement, and we could meet a 4-year requirement with a facility like that without additional staff. Because our teachers would change from being like instructors in phys ed to being kind of almost like wellness counselors. They would be working with students, and the technology that's out there that's rapidly developing is supporting this kind of work. I found some high schools. I found a high school in Australia that is using what essentially is like Fitbit or Strava technology with their young people to really give them, biometric feedback on are they moving enough. And that kind of technology, it used to cost, $300 to outfit an elite level athlete with a heart rate monitor. For $300, you could buy how many heart rate monitors? A lot. Especially if you're scaling those purchases for all your students. University of Vermont has a program called the Wellness Environment, and it is receiving significant amount of national attention, not because of its focus on fitness or athletics, but because of the ancillary benefits that they're finding are coming from their students who are engaged with the wellness environment, which uses that model of tracking your activity, tracking your nutrition, and they're seeing those students are doing better in the classroom. They are, and you can Google this. It's called the Wellness Environment. Dr. What's his last name? Hutziak is now like a national known expert on this. He's actually on the medical school faculty. And also they're seeing lower incidences of drug and alcohol, binge drinking, connectedness to school, all sorts of positive outcomes of their of their implementation of that model, there's no question that we would become a we feeder school, that we would immediately, and we've had conversations with Hodziak about this in the past, David Young and I have, and there's no question that we would instantly become, would adopt that model and with support from the university. The last thing I'll say is that specific to South Burlington, we do have students and families in our community that don't have a problem accessing whether it's recreational or athletic or fitness activities. You know, if this model included, you know, if somebody came to me and said, we should build a tennis center, or we should include a hockey rink, or we should attach a golf course, I would be like, no, like that's not, you know, that would not be prudent. When we look at the activities that our students engage in, now I'm starting to talk about after-school activities. When we talk about the after-school activities that our students engage in at the most, like the quickest growing programs, and the programs that most represent the entirety of our student body, from gender, from socioeconomics, from however you want to disaggregate the student body, the teams and activities that most are representative of the student body are the ones that have the lowest barriers for entry. So for example, nobody walks in to their sophomore year and decides, I'm gonna try out for ice hockey. Or I think I'm gonna be on the alpine ski team. I just moved here from from Virginia, gonna go out for alpine skiing. You know, that never happens. What happens all the time are students who come in and say, I've never done ultimate frisbee. I'm in. And our ultimate frisbee numbers, we went from 0 teams to 3 teams. Track and field is the best example of that. Our indoor track team has the highest percentage of the student body participating in indoor track. Outdoor track is a slightly lower, it's actually a smaller team, believe it or not, despite the fact that we have an outdoor track. And some of that is because some of the athletes who are on the indoor track team migrate to lacrosse or field hockey or baseball or what have you in the spring. So from an access to physical activity, having this kind of center would be a complete game changer. Cole's got a schedule. I haven't looked at his schedule. He probably has at least 1 free period a day. No, well, he's not a good example. He's not a good example, but plenty of students. I looked at a junior's schedule today, and I was like, this guy's got too much free time. And a lot of times for our students, that free time is sedentary. You know, I'm in a study hall. I'm sitting in the lobby. I'm in the library. I mean, they're not. It's not like they're doing terrible things with it. But to imagine that a student who's like, yeah, I got a free period, I'm going to go down and get a workout in, and I'm going to swipe in. I'm going to throw some weights around. I might go for a run. Then I'm going to go back to my 4th period class or whatever. Those are the kinds of asynchronous opportunities that could really take off for our kids. And the time that would really matter for us is between October and April. Because between October and April, and everybody knows this, we're all Vermonters, we're sitting around. And to imagine that we could, get our young people engaged in something that's so clearly good for them, like we're not going to debate that. Especially in those winter months when it's dark when they get to school, it's dark when they go home, and it would really be like an unbelievable game changer across the program. Not just for athletes, not just for track kids, not just for and not just for high school kids too, because I imagine it would be something that would be able to be accessed by, pre-K through 12 plus. The other thing about building that size is now we're doing things, like right now we go off-site for graduation, like all those kind of things. We're putting everything in there now. We don't have to, we don't ever have to imagine that, and we could, again, plus, we could, host things for the region, certainly host things for the state. All sorts of opportunities for our school and for the community to, just because it's a big box that could become, multi-purpose in a lot of ways. So that's maybe more than you wanted to know, but, and, whatever happens, and it's certainly obviously, democracy is the greatest form of governance, or the worst, except for all the others, right? So, but but I want to make sure that, that people understand that, and Lee knows this because it wasn't even in the original, 8 concepts, but as we really started talking about, what we were imagining for the next 60 years for the city of South Burlington, it became pretty apparent that if we didn't at least have this as part of the discussion, we wouldn't be doing what we were charged to do.
From my perspective, it's important to know, given Patrick's, again, highlight of some of the activities that our facilities are engaged in. I think it's important, again, I think it's clear that we're a district that's performing pretty well in the state. Again, we can all debate how those rankings happen and where our high school ranks and et cetera. I think part of the success obviously is on our academic rigor and our staff that render that clearly, number one. But I think it's also important to note that it is in part in play the activities and some of those peripheral resources that we provide. Important in that square footage conversation, when we talk about indoor track, those of you who've been in and around our high school, we make it happen, but we are at risk for how we make that happen. We make it happen through the hallways. We ask staff as they walk out their doors to look left and right, and we've had accidents, and we continue to try to walk a fine line with our insurance, but it's not something that we can continue without doing something different, and that's something different. If we don't address it, is talking about other programs that don't require that level of participation. So the last part I'll end with, and I started out with kind of our ends. We talked about our academic outcomes, but I think it's important to note that these activities add significant value, albeit ones that we still need to measure more accurately for the board, but disposition for lifelong learning and personal development, I think, are at the forefront of some of those tenets around how students meet that. When they work out and are participating on a team, a group, themselves, those are some of the gains that we see. Again, really, really important and critical to to readying them for their next step.
If I could, Elizabeth, just to add to your original question of those factors for consideration. When I was actually putting this slide together, I was thinking through those things, and besides the fact that the numbers are all scary and it's a huge ask of the community, we all get that, and you put that aside and say, we are trying to set the community and the schools up for the next 50 plus years with this project. And if you spend that kind of money, you're not coming back to touch these things for a while. So when I'm going through this, the baseline project is the baseline project. It's big, it's expensive, but they're 2 big schools and you got 1,700 kids that we're trying to accommodate. The Wellness Center, I think, is a great program enhancement, and it's a real personal decision for the community and the board about how to offer those PE spaces, in a facility like this or just integrated with the high school. The third one, I think, is really important. If you can find an option where you can renovate a building, or for $6.5 million more, get a whole new building that meets all of your educational needs for the perceived future, and you don't have to come back, it's something really to concentrate on. The next piece of that I would look at is the $1.5 million to find an option that you could get kids into that new space 2 years earlier without all the disruption of stuff going on. That's another thing I would really have to think hard about. So I recognize, and we all do, these are big numbers. And some of those things, for a little bit more, are you making the right investment in the community to set yourself up for that 50, 60-year project? So that's kind of the lens I was looking at when I'm trying to put this stuff together. But they are big numbers.
Well, so I think one question to follow on to the Wellness Center. It seems to me a very compelling case that it's meeting an unmet need for the students, but it's also being sold as a boon to the community. If the need is so great and so unmet, And in fact, we're talking about students from outlying areas coming in and perhaps using it and having competitions. Sort of how much is left over for the community? Is it really a boon to the community, or is it just meeting a student need? And I don't know if the working group spoke to that, or,
I can answer a little bit on that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that where we would start is with the fact that in terms of the recreation department, the vast majority of recreation department activities that connect with physical activity actually take place in one of the 5 schools. And so we would obviously be able to absorb, all of those activities would continue to take place within the schools. And then I think simply because of the spaces, we would be able to work with the city to say, all right, let's really make sure we've got this thing scheduled, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., 24/7, 365. In terms of high school activities and athletics, Sundays, for example, are pretty much off days with rare exception. And so that's an entire day that we could say to the city, hey, if you wanted to run a program where you could have short amounts of time during the week and then a big chunk of time on the Sunday, that would be great. Given access to our current PE space within the high school to outside groups during the summer is really tricky for like a million reasons. Like, we're redoing the floors, we gotta, you can't get where you wanna be, and not just the floors in the actual gym, but like the floors all over the school. That, the summertime would become way more available in a facility like that with a separate entrance where, there would still be maintenance stuff that had to happen over the summer, but it's not at the scale. So I think I think the primary user would be the school. I'm not going to, even pretend that that's not the case. But I do think there would be pretty significantly increased opportunities for rec to get in to the facility, as well as other, I don't know what we call them, renters, like AAU basketball or USA Track and Field. And there's a few people involved with track and field around the region who have been paying attention to this conversation, because there are no indoor track and field spaces in Vermont that are available for public use. And so, we held a meeting at Dora Whittier. I just off the top of my head invited 25 track and field people, and like 32 people showed up. Because, everybody was sending me texts like, hey, I'm the assistant AD at UVM. Is it okay if I bring this person? Is it okay if I bring that person? And so there is that, there is the opportunity for us to bring those folks in. And, again, like, if we're putting, and, if you know me, like, you couldn't love hockey more than I do. But if Lee came to me with a picture with a hockey rink next to it, I'd be like, I really don't, and yet, there are 3 public high schools, 4 if you count BFA St. Albans, that have hockey rinks attached to their school campus. And I think that's, I'm looking at that, I'm like, well, you got 20 boys and 20 girls playing hockey. And, maybe you have a unit in your PE class where the kids are doing hockey, Hartford has a pool, Mount Abe has a pool. It's like, well, maybe they have a swimming unit, but to me, it feels like that, again, this, because it is that low bar, easy to access, it would really benefit so many kids and so many people within the region.
There's a meeting with city
yeah,
staff on Monday to sort of understand better what the city is thinking in terms of its needs for recreation and see where they match up and where they don't. And that was, in my mind, one of the reasons for Concept 5 is that the Wellness Center is definitely easier to have that discussion about than PE facilities that are integrated in the 2 schools. It's just easier to give the public access. It's easier scheduling wise. It's just easier. And it's easier if the city were to come to us and say, could you add on this tiny bit of extra space just for, what we're looking for? It's easier to do that if we're talking about a separate wellness facility as opposed to, our 2 schools. on their own.
You mentioned the city meeting on Monday evening, and I hope to go myself.
No, it's,
but-
that's
Well, they're two separate meetings. So there's one for the public to
Yeah.
come and say, this is what we as a community would really like to see. There's also a meeting between staff to sort of say, this is where we are in our thinking and in our plans, and just to get a better sense of what each is doing and where we could work together or where we need to do things separately.
Yeah, and those things are still very much moving, as I understand it. But the way that I understand it now, what's going to be offered at the school were we to do this is not going to be replicated in a meaningful way by what the city is considering.
We don't really know that, Brian. I think that's part of the meeting.
That's the question?
Again,
Yeah,
We've
okay.
had, again, we're collaborative, we're talking through this, and we have this meeting set up, and our hope, again, as Bridget highlighted, is to look at kind of what are your needs, what are our needs, what's the usage, kind of expectation. Is there potential, again, for overlap, or again, as she said, maybe there isn't. But I think we owe it to the community, obviously the school community and the city community, to tease that out and say, we've done our due diligence, and say, these are the things that are either we can do together or not.
Yeah.
And be able to, that's an important component, I think, for the board to be able to take into account and do that. And this is not, again, we're on kind of this wellness facility at the moment, but that is not different than also what we're trying to do with the performing arts space. Again, they are less, they're less involved, I think, with a projected plan. They have a desire and want, and they've been active that way. But we want to have the same conversation with them and just say, what kind of things do you want? Because we do want this. This is, again, a community. This would be a community, facility.
If I step back and I think, people from the community are going to come into this conversation at different stages, and we're at a stage where we're trying to give some direction on which concept to develop, a more discrete financial model so that it would allow us to articulate to the community and the voters, this is what we're asking to fund, essentially. Am I correct in that? Yeah. So, I step back, and I'm an advocate for investing in the facilities at this point, largely driven by the fact that we've gotten beyond that cusp of where our investment in preventative maintenance and kind of upkeep and the infrastructure associated with older facilities is starting to outweigh the make versus buy decision of investing in new. I mean, you described it a little bit, Lee. However, with that said, as we're getting, numbers that are starting to become more accurate, and I have to look at the list of things that, that are newer information that have added to both the scope and the cost of the project, the rate of closing that gap between a make versus buy decision, or really kind of investing in infrastructure and building new, it could extend out. So I would look at it and say, we will owe the community at some point kind of a payback period, whatever that might be. So it's like, how many years could we kind of continue to invest in infrastructure beyond which, the cost of investing in upkeep is going to be outweighed by building new. And that's getting longer now with a more expensive project. As construction costs go up, that will continue, so that you always have to keep that in mind. I also look at this and say, I think you're right. We're investing in the next 50 or 60 years. I think this community has really looked at schools as the heart of the community, and to look at the fact that we are one of the towns in the state that isn't experiencing declining student enrollment. We've maintained that really well. We're anticipating and forecasting some growth over the next 10 years. And I think Chittenden County itself has experienced job growth. So looking at that investment and saying what's going to continue to make South Burlington an attractive community to choose, and also looking at those of us who are homeowners and taxpayers and saying we want to preserve the integrity of our investment in our homes and hopefully realize some, opportunity when we choose to sell those properties. that should be considered too. And I think the educational system that's offered is a big component of that. It's, part of my question is if at this stage, before we've made the investment to really get to a more finite number to take to the voters, there's already a list. And I would say the wellness center, I would almost take out of that because that was added after the fact to the base project. The question would be, and I don't know if it's a question anybody can answer, but it's really what I want to think about is that what else don't we know is really what I'm fundamentally saying, because we're from the first phase of this, I think we were at about 170 million, and we're at 210 with some additional information. So, it's kind of what will it really be? And does that trade-off of the kind of investing in some dated infrastructure versus the building new, and that the board unanimously is bringing it to this stage because we believe we're beyond the cusp right now of that baseline investment. I think we're looking at really the facility stewardship we're at what, 60 million?
55 million.
Yeah, over the time frame is, just remind me on that, is it like 5 years, 3 years? Do we have a year on that?
I don't know what you mean by the years.
The duration for that project?
The duration, yeah,
Yeah, I was curious about
for
that too.
facility stewardship.
If
Yeah,
it
there's
were just
phasing
to
in that
improve the
forward.
infrastructure, there's obviously, phasing and portables, and is there even like a back of the cocktail napkin that would take 3 years or 5 years, or?
Yeah, we didn't do just infrastructure only phasing, I don't believe as an option.
We
In
did.
the first
The
round.
very first
in the
sequence,
first
but not in
sequence.
these 5 concepts.
No.
Right.
I think a lot of that depends on whether you decide to do infrastructure only on both schools simultaneously.
Yeah, that's right.
And if that's the case and you build portable villages outside of each of the 2 schools at the same time and decide, let's undergo, in-depth renovations in both buildings simultaneously, then, you might be able to do it in 2 to 3 years. But if you're going to stagger them and do them separately, it might be closer to 4.
Well, and I think, kind of stepping back, I think I would like to sort of make sure we understand the sunk cost of sort of the preventative maintenance, the upkeep. And then also, we always run into, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but this is a complicated project. But it's also the notion that at some point in time, we will have just invested in something new, whether it's, air handling system or, whatever it might be, and that'll be right before we have to make a decision to build something new. So the irony of
Right.
that, and I think, Alex, you brought it up in a previous meeting, of investing in the athletic fields, the restrooms, for instance, and that's been a project that's been on the books for a long time. And now we're having a conversation about, is that going to be the best situated? But, that's a commitment that's been made and is needed. It's been needed for a long time. So we will run into that and really have to explain that to the community. So, I guess, I look at it and say, I think we really need to be able to articulate those preventative maintenance costs and that list of projects and the timing associated with it, and the fact that there's been largely and primarily an emphasis on the student experience and the academic experience with the working committee associated with this. And we are looking to improve, not just maintain, what we deliver in terms of pre-K through grade 12 education within the system. And again, I'm an advocate for moving forward. I know, I still have sticker shock when I look at these numbers.
Yeah.
Well, and hopefully to build on that comment, that's what I want to get at. You see big numbers like that and you think, holy cow, give me option 0. I don't want to do any of that. But option 0 effectively costs $60 million. You have kids living or studying in portables for 3 to 5 years. And I think we're not also openly saying right now that the high school is already over capacity by 100 kids, and we're expected to go that way another 100 in the next decade. I mean, you can't actually do infrastructure only at the high school effectively. So I think you have to understand what's wrong with option zero. It really doesn't work.
Can I ask another question actually for Patrick and then Lee and Roberto? Patrick, what's the current enrollment at SBHS? I mean, get it.
About 950.
About 950, okay. And what is the capacity of any of these new high school concepts? Number of students?
1,050.
1,050. So we've got room for an extra 100 students over the next 60 years in the high school.
Yes, and the demographer is estimating about that within the next 10 years and then a leveling off.
And then
10 years.
To plateau, yeah.
And, you know, well, I think that's kind of the getting at the concern that I have, is that I don't know if this, if the high schools that are, you know, mentioned in here are planning for you know, the next 60 years. They're planning for the next 10 or 20 years. And I'm starting
No.
to become concerned that the high school that we have in these concepts is just not big enough. We'll have to add on to it, just like we did with the current SBHS. And I would hate to see it turn into a kind of a Frankensteinian building, kind of like the current one is now, with, you know, lots of added parts here and there, and losing lots of functionality.
Well, I think there are two things. One is that the demographer's projection goes out a few decades, and it has
Yeah.
been pretty accurate, and it's forecast to level out after 10 years. The other is the new high school will be built with more fungible design so that you could effectively add onto it more cheaply if necessary.
Well, that's the next question, is how do you add on to these high school,
The
this high
other
school?
most important piece is, right now, you're operating a high school basically at 100% utilization, pretty close.
More than that, yeah, but
Right,
yes, right,
Because you got more kids coming in. So
yeah.
the new building is planned to be able to be about 85% utilization. So you've got some inherent growth cap in there to get back up to 100%, in addition to the fact that we're sizing it initially for the extra, 1,050 kids. And we're gonna be marking out on the space where you could put classroom additions. So it's not, it's a hard thing to design to an enrollment out there in the crystal ball and, the demographer's projections. And really the best data you've got is, 10 years on an enrollment projection. Beyond that, it gets really fuzzy.
Well, yeah,
I think
you
everything
can't
we've
predict it.
looked at points us to the direction that we're pretty comfortable with that, and we can't guarantee that, there's not some huge in-migration to South Burlington, and you do have to look at something in the future. But the best information that we have right now saying we're internally building flexibility into the new design that could accommodate more than 1,050 kids. You're gonna increase your utilization. But you've got some of that flexibility. In addition, we're also gonna be planning, depending on where we put that on the site, where could you put a future addition if that enrollment growth did come?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm looking for, and is,
The other thing
I see
I would add-
expandability, that,
One
I
of the
guess.
things that I've been making sure in talking with people who are experts in this area is the common space, because, and how, what do we really have for that common space, meaning like lobbies, hallways, cafeteria,
Yeah.
the kinds of things that we have discovered, if you've ever been to like a lunch at the high school, it's like, we can't make our cafeterias any
It's a
bigger, and it's a
mess.
mess.
Yeah, it's-
Right, so, but those common spaces, to one of the things that I've been saying in those meetings, with a little bit of the same concern that you have, that, you build it and all of a sudden you end up with more people and the demographers are wrong and they're just shrugging their shoulders and we're sitting here with like a too small high school again.
Yeah,
Is that those common spaces are, adequate enough, and that the kinds of changes that would need to be made would be these like incremental, like more easily changed shifts in terms of the physical space. But, and that's, and again, like back to the design, like, and to our problems, like, it is the Frankenstein building that you referred to. It is those nooks and crannies, and it is the common space and just the people moving, the lack of thoughtfulness around moving hundreds of young people around our school all the time. I met with new staff today, and I was like, the first thing you're gonna notice is that there's kids everywhere. And I don't know where you're coming from. We have one woman from California, one from North Carolina, one from Milton. I said, the first thing you're gonna notice is there's kids everywhere. And you're gonna say to yourself, where are all these kids either coming from or where they're supposed to be. Because it is likely that at your school, you're kind of used to them having a place to go that doesn't exist here. And so, if we did grow to 1,000 students, whatever, within the classrooms, we push that number of utilization higher in terms of that percentage that Lee was talking about. And then when we get to that untenable number, then then you'd have to do something. But, that would be I guess the best they can do.
The expensive additions are expanding a gym that's a little
Right.
bit too small, right? It's not
Yeah.
just the end wall.
Right.
Right? It's those core spaces, the media center, the common spaces. So these are all sized appropriately, probably larger than what you need for 1,050 kids. In the classroom addition, that's pretty cost effective. If you said, I got 100 kids and I got to build 4 classrooms on, but the rest of my core is fine, that's a much more cost effective approach to an addition that can be thoughtfully planned because we're thinking about it now. Of where can you add classrooms on, right? And they're not on the back 40 where you got to walk 2 hours to get those. They're related classroom space designed to be next to related classroom space.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, that we currently live on the same campus, and Patrick will tell you, and Karsten, that we have students that go back and forth, that walk, right? It's not great, and we don't do it enough. We'd like to do more of it. Although I think we're very sensitive to the environment for high school students and our middle school students, but options based on option or concept 5 can allow for, what I would say emergent conditions if you had to bump into the middle school, obviously barring safety and security and helpful separation, you could do it, right? And reverse to the middle school. Right now, you don't have that capability to do the same, or certainly we do some of it. We'd like to do a lot more, but there's obviously restrictions because of the distance between them.
I'd just like to clarify one thing, while the current school population is about 950, that's not what its current capacity is. Its current capacity is much less.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to clarify that because.
And the other thing, we're talking a lot tonight, Elizabeth, to your points, infrastructure, when do we get to that cusp of more or less, we're talking about, the wellness center. The most exciting piece of this project to me is the layout change, the design change, and how it's going to facilitate what you guys are trying to do educationally from what you're doing now where you're bumping into the building all the time and you can't get done what you want to do. And to me, that's the most invigorating opportunity that's out there to be able to enhance what you're trying to do.
And can you clarify, none of the options from a phasing standpoint, actually, I don't think any, you can clarify this. Do any of the options have any temporary classrooms that would have to be on site?
No, when you made that decision to be a new high school, then that freed up for us. We don't need to do trailers because we have your old high school that we can use as swing space.
Okay. Because I wanted to clarify that, because that, again, for anybody that's coming into this later in the game, that was a big consideration for the board, because any phase of a project that required temporary classrooms on site while construction was going on adds a bunch of variable costs that there's no value to after the fact. And we did try to avoid that, despite the numbers. And the other question is, can you address that safety and security, kind of the line of sight that you referenced in each of the concepts, and sort of which is optimized, regardless of city zoning requirements at this point?
Sure. So this approach, building on the north and west side of the site, this creates some street presence. You got a lot of traffic on Dorset Street. There's not a lot of space to find out exactly what's going on between the primary entrance and where the school is. So one of the things that we try and do is keep the buildings themselves off of main transportation routes. If you have a site that lends itself to it, which you do here, you can make that work. So when we're looking at anything that's directly fronting on Dorset Street would be kind of more of our least favorite approach to this. And so you can see in concept 1, we're pretty close there. In concept 2, this is a little bit better, right? We're putting the high school back. The existing middle school is where it is, and it is still off of Dorset Street. So that works fairly well. and the wellness center is in the back as well. Concept 3, again, you can see we pushed that stuff to the back, and you got your existing school. 4, again, this was looking at trying to create that zoning requirement to keep stuff. And again, it's the same thing. Now you've got the high school and the middle school, fronting Dorset Street versus concept 5, oops, right? Everything's in the back, so there's much more buffer zone, green space between the parking. You can sequence the parking, you can sequence the access to the entry piece. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into there, how we do landscaping, to be able to slow that sequence down, create good sight lines. So from that standpoint, this option probably meets those requirements the best. I'd be happy to send around some of those things from, the school design through environmental design, crime prevention, and what those standards are, so you guys can see kind of what's out there. But that's probably the biggest one, is site location, where it is located on the site.
Yeah, I think, and also, just we struggle sometimes being in and around more major roads, particularly at the high school. It's not, certainly we're concerned about daily safety and security, entrance and who's coming and going. This is why we've gone to single entrances at our buildings, and the high school, as said earlier, multiple doors, but we have only a single door entrance. We make people walk around, we know it's an inconvenient process. But also just the general streetscape. I mean, we have a lot of vehicles that are, moving back and forth on that street, and sometimes an accident will, that could have a truck that's turned over with fuel on it could put us in a major situation. So, I think, again, just the whole safety and tabletop exercises that we've done have continued to yield towards the ability to have more sight lines and reaction. More time yields to better responses. So again, that's been one of the things that we've definitely witnessed and seen.
We've done a lot of work with specific consultants, security consultants, the consultants that did the planning of Sandy Hook after, and kind of going through all of that experience. So we've learned a lot through that process of where the best locations are from a security standpoint and all of the sequencing. So we're thinking about all of that stuff, and certainly when we develop something further, prior to the community voting on it, we'll be able to outline these are all the things that were thought of from a safety standpoint.
You have a question? I don't know if other boards
Yeah, let
have it,
me
but I
just
know
kind
that
of
others have.
ask the board first. Other questions or comments from the board? Because I think we have some community members that would like to weigh in.
Yeah, one last question or comment is that I know there's been some discussion about putting an indoor track or maybe a walking track or something of that concept at the Veterans Park, and I think it's kind of in the earliest stages of it, but that makes me wonder, well, should we be thinking about putting an indoor track on our campus if there's going to be another one a mile away? I don't know. I don't know where we're at on that, and I can't.
I haven't heard that specific. Again, part of our purpose of our Monday meeting is to,
Right.
again, make sure we're having these conversations. Maybe there's something more emergent than we've just heard, but I know we have a few city folks in the audience, but.
There's a big difference between at least what was in the city's kind of conceptual program for that was an elevated walking track.
Yeah.
It's like 3 lanes, and it's, to walk on. It's much different
Oh,
than
yeah.
a 200-meter competition track, which isn't anything that they envisioned
Yeah.
originally. I'm not certainly speaking for the
Right.
city, but that, at that time, wasn't part of their rec program, the
Yeah.
indoor track facility.
So before we open it up for public input or questions, the other question I have is, I understand the convenience of minimizing the timing, to get students into new facilities as quickly as possible. Is there, I don't know if you can answer this, Lee, or it might be to Gary, is there a financing benefit to bonding more over time that might not be offset by higher construction costs, for instance?
What was the construction cost quote that you had mentioned this morning about how much per month it is just to have
So
contractors on site?
when a contractor is on site and they're carrying their normal cost for keeping a project going, they call it general conditions. And so the general conditions on this project is roughly $160,000 a month for this size of a project, the scale of it. So you can just think, that impact, $160,000 a month on those varying construction durations. That's why you're seeing the wild swings in cost, because it's very expensive to carry those costs continually. And every time we have to mobilize and demobilize them, it gets more expensive.
Well, can I clarify that? Can you go back to the cost estimates on the concepts? Because I didn't see a big swing on between 3 years and 8 months at 209.6 and 5 years and 2 months at 208.4. That's the high end, right? Or 5 years and 10 months
Between
at
4 and 5.
208.
We talked about this morning too, Lee.
Yeah.
Could you clarify?
I mean,
for us
that doesn't, to me, that doesn't represent 160 grand a month differential.
The main difference there is with option 4, you have significant phasing and construction duration. So in phase 1, I don't know if you go to the phasing concept. So the contractor will take over that red area first. He'll put up fencing and construction entranceway and say, this is my area that I'm doing construction. Then the students move out, and then he moves on to the into that yellow area there, and so now he's got to take everything down and move all his storage containers. Everybody shifts over and then starts over again. So there's a cost associated with each of these moves during construction, and it gets to be more complicated because the contractor also has to coordinate all of the moves from people moving and so forth. So so there's additional cost in each of these different phases and with the duration in this particular concept. Where this concept is different from option 5 is that the existing track remains, the existing other fields on the upper right-hand corner there, those are all remaining, so there's no additional cost associated with that. Now, if you switch to concept 5, and so here you see this is much simpler phasing. The contractor just comes in, he's got his area that he's working in the entire time that he's there, can get the whole project done. The guys are just working away, building that building. Meanwhile, the school is doing its thing down the lower section. And so then the new students move in, then he finishes up the fields in the front. It's very simple. The downside with this is what I think Lee had mentioned earlier, is that that wellness center is being constructed in an area where there's currently a lot of fill, so it's unsuitable, really, soil where it needs to be enhanced with either piles, footings, or additional structural fill to remove the soil that's not good for supporting the building. So there's an increased cost associated with the construction in that southeast corner there.
I think what you're explaining to me, Rob, is that they're different projects, so
Right.
you're ending up with a different outcome,
You can't do
but built into there is less contractor costs.
Right.
Except
the
it's
big
still-
difference is you got to move the outdoor stadium. It's around $3 million.
Right.
And you don't have that in 4, where you do have this. So the simplicity and the phasing model and the cost savings that we got from this, we somewhat incrementally added back to
Traded
that,
out,
the
yeah.
cost of the
Yeah,
outdoor
so
track.
I think
and
in
the
short,
soils.
you can't compare general construction costs of one concept to another
Yeah,
in pure
they're-
form.
they're very
Well, and
right,
I think
so-
that's what I was
Yeah,
trying
right.
to understand, the statement that it would be
Yeah,
substantially
makes sense.
lower on a per-month basis,
Mhm.
but it's not the same project.
Mhm.
All right, any other board questions or comments? Why don't we open it
Oh.
up?
Cole.
Oh, sorry, Nicole?
So something that was discussed like very earlier on, I believe in like the 8 options were like field, net gain, or loss. And so I just wanted to know, because like I don't necessarily know what could be put into the wellness center, but I see a lot of the plans involve possibly not having the tennis, and so like I don't know where that would go. And so like I just guess I would want to know roughly how many fields, what field space we would gain or lose in each plan, because I know that if you walk outside in the spring or in the fall, like all of them are being used. And so I would just want to know like what could be put into the wellness center that would be lost per se, and just that kind of thing.
The stuff going into the wellness center would be all indoor things, like you see your gyms and locker rooms. That would be, what you're talking about is outdoor field space. Are we infringing on that, so we're gonna take away some of the fields that you have now? Our goal was to be net neutral in this, so, you know, while we didn't actually draw in the tennis courts, what's built into the estimates is we gotta replace those. You know, so whether they end up here in this corner, we haven't figured out where they are yet, but we know that's kind of the mission given to us is you guys have a lack of current fields here, so we don't want to impinge on taking more of those fields away. In fact, some of the conversation has been to improve upon that. Can some of these new play fields that we do over the existing high school, should they be considered turf? Because one turf field is almost equal to 5, you know, naturally seeded fields, just in their use potential.
The other thing is that, you know, the wellness center, you know, the interior portion of the track is planned to be rubberized with, you know, basketball courts, but it could also be used for volleyball courts or tennis courts. And then there's also the possibility of having portable turf panels put in, and, you know, a portion of that being used for baseball or other fields during the kind of shoulder seasons. And so while, you know, that building footprint is actually taking up a little bit more space on your site than you currently have today, you know, there is, you know, some field space basically inside that wellness facility that can be used as a simulated outdoor area.
Alex?
Yeah, one last question, and thank you for taking this on. But, you know, one of the issues that we've talked about was that the lack of natural light, in particular in the middle school. And I look up at these drawings, and I know they're just mock-up drawings, but I see that they're much denser than the current middle school. So I wonder are these things, you know, are there detailed plans behind these, or
Yes.
are they higher stories? And
It's deceiving.
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's deceiving to look at it in this, you know, kind of large-scale view. But yes, we do have detailed plans that back up these, and we do have natural light in all of the classrooms and throughout the building. The academic wing is planned, for each of these buildings, is planned to be a 3-story building, so we've consolidated the footprint as much as we can to take up less space by creating a 3-story academic wing. But I can assure you that we have an abundance of natural light throughout the entire building.
Thank you.
All right, now we'll open it up. Yes, in the back. Jerry?
So a couple of points. First, I just want to remind everybody, may not know, 20% of the students in the high school are from out of South Burlington. So when we talked about we're over capacity, let's remember that part of the reason for that is 20% of our students are coming from other communities. That's point number one. Point number two, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2018, 16.5% of residents of South Burlington were between the ages of 1 day and 18 years. Not all 18-year-olds are in the school, and certainly children who are 1 day to 2 years are probably not in school. So let's say about 15% of residents in South Burlington are in the school system. About. On the other hand, the U.S. Census Bureau tells us that 20% of residents in South Burlington are older than 65. They're senior citizens. Many of them are living on limited income. The state of Vermont is a state which taxes Social Security. So this is a big hit for senior citizens. Has the board considered what the impact of this bond will be on the tax rate? And this is a very important point. I'll tell you, my brother who lives in Oradell, New Jersey, on the street he lives in, the taxes on that street are between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. Taxes are going to go up with this big bond rate, okay, with this big bond. So have you considered the impact on the tax rate and the affordability for 20% of your population in this community who are 65 years and older? And let's not think that we're not taking care of the children here. We're spending $20,000 a year to educate a student. David, I know your math and mine are different, but I still say 20,000, okay? And that's because I divide 50 million by 2,500 students and I come up with 20,000. So it must be a different math in the South Burlington High School.
No, it's good now.
Yeah, okay. In any case, so over 12 years, I calculate that's $240,000 per student. So let nobody believe that we're not doing our best to educate students here. That's a lot of money, $250,000. Now you want to spend another $200 million $200 million, including a wellness center, and I think that's a great idea. What are you doing for the 20% of senior citizens in the state in terms of giving them a facility? You're just asking them to pay more and more money. And I'll finish up with one other point. I did my due diligence, and I looked like real estate agents do for comparables. And I found one besides City Place, which I'll leave out because nobody knows what's going to happen to City Place. I found one building which was sort of comparable. The Western University Medical School is building, not a new medical school, they're renovating and expanding a 350,000 square foot building, which comes close to yours. Included in their renovation, this is a new medical school, is 2 brand new floors of new research labs, which are very expensive to build. The cost for that building, renovation and expansion, $76 million. 350,000 square foot, if you want to get an idea of what that is, think of a 2,500 square foot home, and you have 140 of those stacked together. This is a big building, including 2 floors of research labs, total cost of $76 million. Has anybody looked at this $200 million cost and tried to figure out why it's costing that much money? Do you know what the tax rate impact is going to be? Or are you just going to float the bond? Oh, my last question, I wanted to make sure I asked this. If the voters vote the bond down, are you still going to come back with a new bond later? Have you committed to this new building? Or will voters in a democratic system be able to say, no, we've decided it's too much money? Will you accept the voice of the community? It's a fair question. Look, on the sales tax, which we voted on for the recreation center, community voted down. Didn't stop the city from going after that recreation center after the community said, no, we don't want it. So will you accept the voice of the community? Or will you just say, the only thing you're supposed to do is pay the bills?
I think I can respond not necessarily on behalf of the whole board, but yes, we will respect the voice of the community. We also have an obligation to continue to provide the best education we can, and this is not being floated willy-nilly, but that we would have to reevaluate if a bond was voted down, sort of what our next recommendation or next step might be.
So have you looked at the dollar cost of this building and tried to figure out why it's costing between $170 and $210 million? In other words, have you looked at the architectural firm's calculations and said, oh, I understand this, or are you just accepting this? And this is a single bid, is that correct? This wasn't a competitive bidding event, was it?
It was initially, yes. It was initially when we went out. We did have a competitive bid process in which we selected Dora Whittier. So the answer is yes.
How many other bids did you get?
I forget, 4, 3?
It was 3 others.
Yeah.
And they were all in the ballpark range of what the initial
Well, remember,
bid was?
Jerry, I mean, part of the phasing is that it's scoped and phased to help us to understand what we want and then to design what we want. So we're in this phase 2. We, again, not trying to get to some of your other questions, we have additional work to do. Again, we're educating the board. We do have, Bridget's been part of our working group, but again, this meeting is to help inform the board, receive feedback from the board, and we have additional work to do around the implications and the bonding and all of that, and I suspect that the board is gonna, they're gonna wanna see some of that
So have you done
implication.
what I did, which is to look for other buildings of comparable scope and looked at the price tag on those other buildings, or have you just accepted what was presented?
No, I can't speak for the rest of the board. I mean, we have done some of our own due diligence, and we've traveled to different facilities, and we've done tours, and we've asked questions, and we've talked to community members. Again, would we like to do more of that? Sure. But we've done some dipsticking around what others, and again, we haven't gone too far. We've stayed within New England, but we've done some of our due diligence. And
Have they been in the $200 million ballpark figure?
in some cases, again, I'm ballpark, I would say, yeah, they're in that.
If you take into account that they were built a few years back and construction costs have
Yeah.
continued to go up, yes, they're in that ballpark range, yes.
And what communities would those be?
Those would be mostly in Massachusetts and other parts of Vermont.
Other places in Vermont?
We saw a high school in Vermont on our way back from Massachusetts, yes. That was in the ballpark range if you take into account when it was built and when ours would end up being built, in the next. It was.
The only one you looked at in Vermont,
Was
which
Green.
the scale isn't comparable, is Shelburne, but what you
Oh,
are
Green.
referencing is Greenfield,
Greenfield.
Massachusetts.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's right across
close.
the border.
I think the other
Wilmington,
thing, Jerry,
Quincy.
that we're looking at too are the bonds that were passed in Winooski and Burlington and the scope of those projects. And I would say, I mean, again, you know, it's fair to say I'm suffering sticker shock every time we talk about this, but I would say compared to the deliverables on 2 local projects, it probably is in the ballpark.
So do we know what the impact on the tax rate is? Has anybody asked that question?
We have, but I think the question
working
is, we continue to work on, the bonding mechanism is, I mean, Gary is educating the board on the bonding mechanism. I don't know if you have any specific comments, Gary, or not.
The actual tax rates are very difficult to calculate until you get the actual tax year information. But we are in the process of doing a request for proposal for a financial advisor to guide us through the bonding process. And part of that work will be to look at actual best worst-case scenarios based on the variables in the Vermont tax calculation to determine the 30-year impacts of bonding on the tax rate.
With respect, if you just take $209 million, and there are approximately, 7,000 residential parcels and 900 or so commercial parcels, so $209 million divided by 8,000 is $26,000 per.
Over a 30-year period.
Correct. But that's an average.
Okay, other questions or comments? Yes,
Dawn?
Donna?
Yes, I'm Donna Laban, and so many of you received an email from me about a few weeks to a month ago, and just want to make one of the points, because, you know, I attended a lot of the scoping meetings and everything else, and the one concept that I haven't seen here was one that I kind of raised in my letter, and that is something that kind of is largely a reuse of the existing buildings, but utilizing the space between the 2 buildings to create the swing space that you really need to avoid having to put kids in and teaching in temporary facilities. And I really would have loved to have seen that fleshed out some more with some price tags and like what kind of facilities, because David did mention that well, it would be really nice if you had some of that swing space that you could sometimes use for the high school, sometimes use for the middle school. And there is enough space between the 2 buildings. And granted, I mean, during all this construction, most of your parking is going to go away because it's construction vehicles and is going to require a lot of that parking. So, you know, so during any kind of construction, you're going to have to deal with a lot less parking. So, you know, it's not, so taking a piece of a parking lot away to actually construct a permanent building, it would be something I would really like to look at, you know, something where you could put your library spaces, your cafeteria spaces, perhaps your HVAC plant, as well as classrooms so that, you know, when renovations are going on, you have that extra classroom space. And it is a different concept, you know, it's not building a new school, but I think it is a concept really worth fleshing out a little bit more, and it would kind of answer some of the questions I think the community would have around, you know, really have you really thought about, you know, utilizing the existing buildings in the best way possible? You know, granted, there's a lot of work that needs on those buildings, but there's also been a lot of investment in them. And, you know, it's a point I would sure like to see addressed. Thank you.
Dawn, if I can just. This is one point in the whole scheme of things, and I think your question's a good one. When I think about utilizing the high school space in particular, I mean, we're on 5 different levels right now, and no matter what you do, that's not going to change. So I'm hopeful at some point we'll be offering tours to the public, but there's some fundamental design issues within at least that facility that make even a renovation very costly. And I would just offer that up as one point to your question and your comment. But thank you for that.
I was involved in the CPU project, you know, which, you know, it went through a redesign after the original concept was shot down by the voters. And even the architects I worked with felt that, you know, the smaller addition that was added, the reuse of most of the existing classrooms, that it was a better project, just because it was using the space much more efficiently, and, you know, and also to point out that, you know, from the standpoint of building new, I mean, you're never, the energy savings that you're gonna get from building a new building are never gonna be recouped from any, you know, reduction in energy use for those new buildings because of just the very, very high energy costs of building new. And so, yeah, spaces aren't ideal, but most urban schools, you know, they're forced to renovate, you know, existing college buildings. I do a lot of renovation work on existing college buildings. I mean, you make it work. You know, you don't have a choice, you know, you have to make it work because those buildings are historic and, you know, they are going to be utilized. You build the new space where you can't accommodate it in the old building, but you utilize the old buildings in as acceptable a way as you can.
Thank you. Yes.
So I'm kind of tying to both of those last statements. Lee, can I ask you a question? So what is your approximate square foot cost for the new school construction?
Approximately project cost, all in is about 400.
That's what I thought, okay. So I saw anywhere from about 400 up to about 515, depending on which version, and taking phasing and all that stuff. You're saying $400 a square foot for new school construction. And $6.5 million is the difference, the delta between renovating the middle school at 120,000 square feet and building new. So that's $54 a square foot. So you're saying it's $350 a square foot to renovate the middle school?
No, I'm not.
That's what the math says.
Well,
What you just gave us.
it does. The detail in that math, right, is the hard construction renovation cost, I believe, is somewhere around $190 a square foot for the renovation of the middle school. The additional cost comes into the phasing pieces of that and doing it over sequentially longer periods of time. So when we get all of this stuff published, we'll be able to provide, and we have that information. It's 400 on average over the whole project. Mm-hmm. Some pieces of it are less, some pieces of it are more. In a renovation option, the cost per square foot is less. When we costed this out, and we can go through the math on this, that $6.5 million difference is taken right from the project costs of this on if we didn't do phasing versus we were able to build it all at once faster. That makes up the difference between the two. When you get on and what we're talking about for the infrastructure replacement is pretty comprehensive renovation. You know, it's all of the major systems, you know, the roof, the windows. Mm-hmm. You're basically gutting and pulling that part of the building. What we're not doing was moving any walls. So the $6.5 million incremental difference is the cost to move all of that stuff and reassemble it the way the desired program would be.
One of the other things that might be a little bit confusing is that, you know, during the earlier phase when we were talking about infrastructure renovations only, there was none of this site work that was planned. So baked into those numbers is included a lot of the other site work that's associated with it. So when you think of the overall project costs, you know, you're talking about all the other site work costs that also play into that. It's not just a straight, oh, let's renovate the building alone as a standalone thing.
So as a follow-up, kind of going a different direction, so are you involved with or familiar with the Burlington and Winooski projects?
Somewhat, yes.
Involved in or?
Not involved in.
Okay. What is your opinion on the fact that there's $158 million in generational investment being made in schools by other people who are they're shovel ready come spring, correct, in Burlington, and they're going to start. So we are behind them in terms of getting the talent, the crew, the workforce together. have you anticipated cost for what that'll take? Because there isn't that much resource locally.
You're talking about the subcontractor
Yeah.
market?
Yeah.
We have looked at it. We think there is capacity to be able to do this. A lot of it depends on what happens with, Burlington Town Center and when all of this stuff actually happens.
I would tell you, I've talked to people involved in those other projects, and they don't think there is for us. And there's going to be an opportunity, there's going to be a cost there.
Good questions, thank you. Yes, sir.
Kevin Donahue from South Burlington, of course. I guess when I first read about the 170 million, now over 200. That's a $30 million increase, we haven't even begun yet. So that kind of got my attention. And the city councilors that are here tonight know me. I've been to their meetings many times over the years with the inability of a city that spent $22 million for a city budget in the fiscal year 2011, 2012, now $60 million for this fiscal 1920, and we can't pave the roads in this city. I don't know why I've gone to get a bond floated, because that's what the city needs. And I use the police station as an example, that for $7 million, we got a 20-year bond for the police station. It was $220 per household in the first year of that bond, and went down every year from there. And hell of no, I brought car parts in. A tie rod in is $220 when you break them. I was behind a gentleman in here on Patchen Road, and he hit a depressed catch basin and almost killed himself. We need to spend money in many areas. When the police station was first brought up, I was against it. I thought we could renovate City Hall, because at the time we were talking about building City Hall, a new City Hall in the Market Center. We still haven't done that. We still want a new library, a rec center. The indoor park is new from what I'm hearing as far as the city side of things. I actually think that an indoor track is a fabulous idea for the school system. I haven't ruled out whether if I went to the voting booth for a $200 million school system, I know will turn out to probably be $250 by the time it's done. I don't see any way that it's going to stay at that figure. When this gentleman asking where the figure really came up, have all the estimates come in for heating and ventilating and concrete and everything else to come up with this square footage, or is it just the way it is in commercial space? They're spending over $200 a foot in residential housing in South Village. So you can almost just guess, without spending $350 for a consultant, that's going to be about $400 to $500 for commercial space. I applaud you coming forward, bringing this up to us, but it's got a long way to go. But let's get off of the construction costs. I read where we're talking about the kids need to be educated differently. And I apologize for rambling a little bit, but I don't think it's the buildings. I honestly don't. And going forward, these buildings, I know they're old, I know they cost more to heat than a building, but $200 million, you can buy a lot of fuel for heating buildings. I think in our school system, great teachers, great support staff, great principals, even the custodial staff, all the way down to the superintendent of schools, the school board, worked their butts off. I would rather see, what I do see is the support staff, and I'm talking substitutes, para-educators, they're grossly underpaid for what they do and what they're called upon to do. So before I'd spend money just on buildings, I'd invest in our people. and make sure that they're, taken care of, to educate our kids. We have a lot of, children today, that the percentage is going up of kids that are challenged, both physically and mentally. And it's just that cost is just gonna get higher. And as it's getting higher, we have to look to these people that are taking care of these kids and educating these kids. And it's not the building. I don't believe it. Take care of them, fix the things that are broken. You need security. I see over at Chamberlain, new whole front entry went in over there. The fascia board's rotting on the side of the building, but that's, those are things that, he was $50,000 for a new entry, and we're not taking care of that. So, just, like I said, I worked on the police station committee. I was convinced that City Hall could be renovated. They had a lot of special needs by the end of I got educated in a big way, and that's why they chose to start from scratch over there. But I don't believe the school system, you need to start from scratch. I think we have a lot of good space. I believe in the renovation thing, and I'm surprised at this gentleman that it can cost as much to renovate these buildings that have solid foundation to them as it does to build new.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yes. Hi, I'm Erin. I am on the other side of this, and I think this could be really exciting. I think the price tag is really high, but I appreciate that we've now shifted from thinking of closing our quaint elementary schools, giving our kids a solid base of a community, and now talking about focusing on the older kids and giving them some really unique opportunities that are happening in other states that we don't have here. And Massachusetts does have a lot of these new buildings, but they also have a different buyback with their state. So we are going to be burdened with the cost, and that's unfortunate, but kids are expensive. And healthy, educated kids that are going to take care of all of us and live in South Burlington, that's what we want. And so I really think that this could be exciting, and I think that there's still more to talk about, but thank you for looking into this. I did have one question though. With the elementary schools sort of busting at the seams, and we've always talked about the 5th grade maybe moving to the middle school at some point. Right now, both Orchard and Central are at capacity, really. What will happen with the numbers in terms of like the new middle school is really only 3,000 more square feet. So what, do we have a kind of backup plan if we keep going forward with these new middle and high schools? What will that look like if we keep getting more elementary students?
Do you want to speak, or Lee or
Sure.
Bridget, on capacity? And
Sure. So the middle school right now is not at capacity in the way that the high school is over capacity. So there is some capacity in the middle school. And the new middle school, as you said, is approximately the same size as what we have now, but the space would be much more efficiently organized and better used for the program. Just as we talked about with the high school, the new middle school would also be more thoughtfully designed in terms of if we ever did need to move, a 5th grade, the common spaces and those kinds of things we're looking at would be appropriately sized if we needed to expand somewhat, and we would be sure to build in that kind of flexibility. But there would not be the flexibility to wholesale move the 5th graders on day one if we decided that we were going to do that. But we are thinking through those issues as we move forward.
Sandy.
Sandy Dooley, I live in South Burlington. First of all, I wanted to say I support a lot of what you say, and I am a senior citizen. I hate to bring up what I think may be a new cost item, but I really do think you need a budget for public education. I think one of the problems is that the cost of construction have gone up so much faster than, or at a much greater rate than people's incomes have gone up. And we are an aging community. We have a larger percentage of senior citizens than the county as a whole, for example. One of the problems is that as senior citizens, if we have lived in our houses very long, paid so much less for our housing than what it costs now because of that cost of construction. For example, just putting in a new kitchen, not a fancy kitchen, costs more than my husband and I paid for our house. And so I just think understanding I don't want to, if I live for 10 years, I don't want to see this high school here looking decrepit and, and looking like it's just sort of being held together. That's not what I think is in the best interest of our community or the state, or me, because we need to have a thriving economy and social fabric. So I just think it's going to be a tall order to help everyone understand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things is renovating, you're going to have to pay all this money for these awful trailers where people will be, and kids will be educated. I can't imagine anything worse than that. Because the renovation needs are not minor. So anyway, I appreciate all the work you're doing. I applaud you. Best wishes and good luck.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thank you.
We're going to try to stick on our schedule a little bit, so I'd ask if there's any additional comment, we kind of keep it brief and we can move on. Yes?
Sarah Dopp. Am I completely crazy, or
No.
did I hear between 8 and 10 years ago at a town meeting that we were dropping in school population and worried about that? Am I crazy?
You're not crazy.
Okay, okay,
That
so,
was-
and
that
I
was
know that
3 years
20% of our, okay, so it was even more recent.
Yes, sir.
Which I kind of thought. Demographics can swing fast, is my point, and they could swing in the other direction. So I just put that out there.
Mhm.
A lot of people and families, I think now, are sort of looking at the global situation, climate change, many other challenges that we have as a world, and wondering about the size of their families, et cetera. So, I don't want to get into a diatribe on this, but I just think there's another side to view as well. If we could ramp up in our need for school space this rapidly, we could drop rapidly as well. And I'm glad that we utilize our space by inviting in kids from the islands. I think that's great. But there might come a day when we can't do that because our capacity needs to be for our kids. That's another point to just put out there. I really, in the people I'm talking to in the community, don't sense an appetite for another big bond issue right now. We've taken on a lot of things and not everything has been completed even. I'm just stating that. I think if you're going to sell this, you have to be really concrete in having a big list of things that you could not do through renovation or alteration or a wonderful new concept like this, tying the two buildings together with some common space. I think that's really worth examining. I think you've got to show this could not be solved through renovation because, and this could not be solved through renovation because. The Wellness Center, I heard a really great argument for that tonight. That's kind of new, and I understand that couldn't be replicated in the existing building. So that could be an example. But I think you need a lot of examples to educate the public, to get them on board with yet another big bond issue. I just think that's the right thing.
Thank you. One more question? Yes, sir, right back here.
I'm Tom Papp. I'm the president of South Burlington. I'm sorry I'm late. It was a Coast Scout planning meeting. 2 comments. Number one, the agenda was not on the website within 48 hours of this meeting, so it was not duly warned. It's a violation of Vermont public meeting law and also bypasses or makes it very hard for citizens like us to be able to educate ourselves on the issues that you're going to discuss tonight and be able to provide intelligent input, which I assume you guys are looking for. So I'd like to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because we all want to stay informed, we all have busy lives, but procedure has to be followed. Number 2, I see nothing in the NEASC report, which I've read twice, that states anything about projects of new build being the recommendation. What I see here is renovation costs, which are far less than the cost of these projects. So I'm asking the question, how did we get down this path of looking at very large build new projects and spend a lot of money towards that when NEASC doesn't even recommend it? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We did, just Tom, so you're aware, we did consider as the board, and we amended the agenda to only have discussion on the action items that were warned on the back, items number 15 and 16. We will not be taking action. Those will be for discussion. And I think the brief comment, and I don't want to be repetitive for anybody, is that the normal sites that the agenda is posted on are the school board link and the calendar, the district calendar, and it made it, this meeting agenda made it to one site but not the other. But because a lot of people go to just the school board site for the agenda, we took those off as action items and made them discussion items to comply with open meeting.
Thank you.
And do we have feedback, anything, just for clarity's sake, on the NEAS report relative to?
So NEASC is primarily it is a self-study process, a very long self-study process, and ours took even longer than usual. And there was feedback that significant renovations needed to happen. The challenge that we got into with phase 1 and phase 2, as Dorn Whittier had been studying them, is that, I came into the process myself thinking renovation has to be cheaper than building new buildings. And because of various things that we found during those studies, renovation is extremely expensive, especially at the high school, which is where the biggest renovation needs are. And that's just because of how those buildings were built originally. So costs go up very much when you have load-bearing walls between every classroom. There's very little flexibility in what you can do in those buildings without significant costs. And so it's phasing costs. It's costs like that where you're making major structural changes to a building as opposed to just moving a wall that's not load-bearing and reconfiguring some classroom space. So NEASC was one data point that we looked at as we did the study, but there was a very in-depth study with regard to the infrastructure of these buildings, the mechanical, electrical, ventilation systems, plumbing, all of that, that really showed significant needs in both schools. And that's not really as covered in NEASC as sort of the educational need, but those are some things that could have significant problems with very little warning, and that would necessitate moving kids into temporary classrooms on a very ad hoc, very quick basis. It's something we want to avoid. So the option 0, or even -1 really, of not doing anything right now, I think in my mind as a board member was not an option, because I don't want to see us in a crisis situation where we have buildings that are at the, especially the high school, it's at the end of its usable life, where we're having trouble maintaining major systems in the high school simply because of the age of those systems. So then it came to, well, what if we just renovate those systems? And that leads to this $55 million cost that we're talking about, and significant disruption to the educational program. And after that $55 million ask of the community, there'll be no noticeable difference to the kids' day-to-day lives or the educational program that we're offering. The buildings to the kids will, with the exception of potentially heating and cooling, perhaps being better, and comfort level, in terms of the structure of the classrooms, the adjacencies that we talked about during the phase 2 study and the visioning process that we went through, none of that would look different. So that gets you to a deeper renovation where you're actually talking about adding educational opportunities by moving where things are in the buildings so that like programs can be closer to like programs. It means building out common spaces so that we can build a little bit more community and hopefully address some of the challenges that we've faced in both schools with building community and keeping kids engaged. And once you start to talk about those deeper renovations, the costs quickly add up. And so I really go back to, we could renovate. It might be slightly cheaper, but not that much cheaper than building new buildings. And the new buildings give us the educational program that we want. It would give us the wellness facilities that we think are best for the kids. And I really think it's our responsibility as a board. And again, I'm not speaking for the whole board. It's my perspective. It's the board's responsibility to say what we think would be the best for the educational program and the provision of education in South Burlington. And the community may say no. It is a very big ask, and we realize that. This is a very big investment that we're asking for. But as a board member, I personally believe this is something that is the basis for, even though it's, you can say it's a small percentage of the community, it's a very significant and very important driver of why people move to South Burlington, why they buy property in South Burlington, why they want to stay in South Burlington, are the schools. And I think it's a very, very important community resource. And if we do nothing with it, or we do very little with it, we're going to continue to have major maintenance or ad hoc projects and not really see the benefit that we could have seen by really thinking bigger and really having a vision of what we want for education in South Burlington and doing our best to execute on that. And as I said, the community may say no. And then to Jerry's point, I see that he's left the room. I don't think it's being disrespectful of the community's wishes to come back. If the community says no and say, okay, well, then if you say no to the big project, then this is what we need to think about, because there are some things that really do need to be done. And I think that's our responsibility, to keep doing what we think we need to do for the students of South Burlington. These are all very good questions. I think a lot of these questions are going to be answered within the next couple of months. So these costs, the ones in options 1 through 8, the costs for concept 1 through 5, are all meant to be comparative. They're all very high level. They're all sort of on a square footage basis for this type of space and these type of construction durations. If we're using the same assumptions for each of the different concepts and options, how do they compare? And then we do have to take a deeper dive. There'll be a cost estimator. A lot of this work that's been done will be sent off to a cost estimator to get a better defined cost that will be taken to a financial advisor that will talk to us about bonding and the different types of funding and financing that we're going to need to make something like this happen. And that can then be turned into, this is what a range of potential tax impact will look like. We're working on that. We're moving it along. This meeting tonight was really meant to start to get the community to pay attention, because we've had a lot of visioning sessions and a lot of pieces all along the way. The phase 1 study was completed not in this past school year, but in the previous school year, and reported out to the community and to the board. Phase 2, the visioning part of it, was completed in April and reported out to the community. Along the way, there were opportunities for community to be involved in that visioning process. And even with the tough questions, I'm delighted that people are paying attention. I want the community to really start talking about this and thinking about what its priorities are and what is important for the students and for the community as a whole, and what some of those trade-offs are. And this is the community's project. We're working on behalf of the community here. So again, all good questions. I think we're working very hard on answers. These aren't things that we haven't thought about. We're just sort of following a process. And right now, we're still gathering input and still trying to finalize that program that will go to the cost estimator. There will be more public engagement, much, much more public engagement, down to the level of small group meetings with different groups of concerned citizens, and as big as, big meetings in the high school auditorium to talk about where we are. So we're not taking what we have today to a vote in March. There will be a lot more engagement and a lot more discussion to be had. But I'm pleased that people are talking about it. I think it's great. So, thank you.
All right, so on that note, we have more agenda to
Yep,
do.
we do.
So I thank everyone for coming, if you
Stay
came out
tuned,
specifically for this topic, and encourage you to kind of continue to engage, and feel free to send questions either through the superintendent or to the board as well.
Yeah, and just a quick note, we probably said it earlier, but make sure the website is up to date and starts with the newest to the oldest, and it's a great chronology of kind of where we've been, as Bridget kind of highlighted earlier.
Yeah, and just for purposes of the feedback we got regarding the agenda itself, we should just add a double check on that agendas make both the school board website as well as the district calendar, in case people are looking at either site. Thanks. All right, we will move on to negotiations update. We were expecting the fact-finding agreement, or a fact-finding report today, and we did hear back from the fact finder that that is delayed until the 30th of this month. So we are waiting that feedback, and we'll move forward on the process from there. I think that's where we stand. All right, moving on to the school board yearly agenda.
So it's for discussion. I think it might be best, given where we're at in time, I'm sensitive to that. The objective was to do a crosswalk between what we've had before, what we proposed, and what we accomplished. And I think that was the impetus for the comparison, and have a deeper conversation around what works, given the complexity of what we have in front of us, what we're able to do, knowing budget timeframe. Also, I think we have to be cognizant of the things that are going to happen between now and March, given some of the other heavy things going on. So I don't know. I think we have it on for discussion. I'm open to kind of take anything back, but my hope would be, as we, kind of look at these in comparison, as I said last time, kind of the overlay version of what have planned and what we've been able to do. And again, maybe you're happy with the schedule and when we did some things here, but to really open up this calendar.
I think one of the questions that came up is there a better time of year to be moving some of the review of policy governance to, by way of example, I'm looking at the first one where there's notes. It was completed in the month that it was scheduled for, 2.3. However, 2.2 got completed, or maybe 4 months after the fact. So is there some reason that should be moved to a different time frame on the schedule?
Good point.
That's a question, because I don't know.
Again, part of this is to remember what was going on at that time.
I guess I'm wondering if there's something that is calendar related, that there was
Held us
required
up.
data, or if this was just a scheduling issue, that's one thing, and a time issue, but if there was a requirement for information that we didn't get till later in the year.
Like audit stuff. Remember, we moved some of the financial conditions and activities.
Right.
We moved, right, which was earlier. We actually completed it in September from the previous audit. Like that. I know what you're saying, Elizabeth. Is there a particular reason why? And if so, the answer is yes, then let's
Yeah, we
move it to
just
that
move
date.
it as
Right.
appropriate.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Other
and-
board comments or questions? Did we have, is there a reason to also make notations on anything other than monitoring?
Well, we've added like other business in the past. I mean, that's where we had some of the other like budget stuff going on underneath, and budget book review, these other categories,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm looking at this broadly, but we've got 2 legislative breakfasts, and I don't think those occurred
Right.
last year. So, do we want to make a more concerted effort to get those on
good
the
question.
calendar now? Or is it something we would agree we don't want to do?
And maybe that's something we collaborate more with the city on too. I mean, we have in the past, of course, we do that, but we've had it on our calendar. We can sync it up with them and see if they're interested too. I don't know. We do it in January. We typically try to do something before they start the session.
Right.
but-
Yeah, I was just going to say, perhaps
Yeah.
we could move it to December so that they're not busy with their
Well,
extra full-time job. Could get better attendance that way.
I haven't done a lot of crosswork on this, so I'm just, again, Delina was helpful to respond, to get this at least updated from what we did, so I'm happy to spend a little bit more time and come back with some suggestions.
Is the board comfortable that we should kind of direct David to continue to update this and keep it on a future agenda item, to the point where we do have to take action on this, correct?
Yeah, at some point we do,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be good. And, and also, central office folks, we've been working to look at, what are the sequences that are needed under policy governance, and looking at some of those that really we probably don't need to have on there, and we could do, as I said last time, more of updates. Instead of doing a financial full monitoring, we can do a monitoring and then some updates, for instance, you know? So I'll come back with,
All right. We'll move that one on. Other paper articles. Do we have those in the packet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good, thanks. I don't know where it is. Let's see, so, gosh, I have something due soon.
You do.
find another one, Brian. You know,
Okay. All right, I guess I'll be circulating something real soon. All right, I'm glad we reminded. So, looking forward, we had identified kind of some holding places for the next 4. And I guess the question is, do these still hold true, or would we want to reorder these at all? Bridget, I think you might have been gone for this meeting, so.
No, I watched.
Okay.
And we had talked about having a series of master planning and visioning articles. I do think the community is gonna, we do need to talk to the community about the recommended design for the high school and middle school after we, as a board, decide that. My only question is whether we really will be ready by 9/26. I mean, I know that we said September 4th. We would really like to pick a direction and go, but we didn't have Martin here tonight. You know, we have some parents, you know, user group meetings coming up. We have some discussion with the city about rec. There are a few other bits of information that are going to be incorporated in that decision, and my question is really, are we going to be ready on the 4th? I would love it if we were, but if we're not ready until the 18th or later, we might run into it. So I would say recommended design is a good tentative, and I'm happy to raise my hand to do that. We may need to sort of rejigger that at the last minute, depending on where we are with it. Yeah, and I would, yeah.
Well, one of the, you know, consistent messages, I think, if I were to summarize a little bit of tonight, but also some of the communication we've received, is really maybe a higher level discussion of the renovation versus build conversation. And I'm wondering if we might not want to consider just having more of a baseline discussion, because we've all had a chance to hear that and get it more in sound bites over time. And I'm wondering if that might be an article of benefit.
An article of renovation versus versus new build.
And I'm just throwing that
I think that
question
makes a lot
out
of
that
sense,
might.
yeah.
I mean, I think that, yeah. I think that would maybe be a paragraph in the article on the recommended design and why we're recommending it. I mean, I guess we could have a separate one.
Well, I guess I'd just ask the board to think about that, 'cause since we don't know where we'll be, to your comment, Bridget, at that stage, that maybe a step back that takes a
Yeah, sure.
higher view. And that might not be the right topic, but
Yeah.
I think we're getting some feedback where those folks who are coming in at different stages of the project
Yeah.
might be brought up to speed more quickly, too. Okay, anything else we want to add beyond that?
You and I talked
Yes.
briefly about, because I had an idea about increasing the student vote, and that would be through a meeting like before town meeting day to just let those seniors know who are 18, hey, this is what is on this ballot. And I have like a lot of ideas about it. The student council is on board with it. If whatever we wanted to do, and so you and I had talked about having that possibly be.
And that would have to actually be in the 2-6 issue, I believe, to be in advance of town meeting. So why don't we put a tentative call of you in that slot, and you can title it what you want, but getting out the vote.
Sure.
Great. All right, anything else anybody wants to add at this point?
Nope.
All right, we're at about 5 topics, so that's good. All right, let's move on to agenda item 12, setting the agenda for September 4th.
So the 4th, we didn't change MPV to action. So again, given what Bridget said, I don't know,
I
we
think
can
should
keep
move it for
action.
action just
Yep.
in case.
All right.
And if we decide to turn it into a discussion, I
We
mean, it's
can do
easier
it
to
at that time.
downgrade to that than to not, to surprise someone with action.
Yeah, very good.
And then we'll have to have,
We'll have to add 15 and 16 back unless we hear we need
Definitely.
a different time frame, right?
I think one of them, we're going to hear a little bit here in a second from Amity on one of them. I think we may need to do earlier, right, Amity, on the VoIP, right? That's going to need to be done before the 4th of September, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Just because we're running out of a 60-day window. Yeah. So that one we'll have to figure out a special meeting time, probably next week. But we also have to talk about whether or not, because this meeting, we'll just say in the warning, whether or not we should have another. And I did talk to Dor Whittier briefly. They're happy to come back again next week and do a kind of a briefer overview for anyone who might be interested. I mean, we could do that, and maybe Martin would be able to be available. I don't know what his availability is, but.
Yeah, well, I thought their time frame on the overview was good.
Mhm.
Is there any information between now and the 4th that we would have in addition? We'll have user group meetings.
we'll have some feedback from some parents and whoever wants to show up, because, I mean, they're warned meetings. So
Yeah, the
people
city
can
will have
come.
received
Yeah,
some
so
rec
we will,
center.
so that was a question. I think, I don't know whom of the board is coming, but we,
I think
to
we
be
need to
safe,
warn
we'll
them.
warn it.
Oh, yeah,
All right.
we need to, I was
Yeah.
assuming we were
Again,
warning
it doesn't mean that
those,
we
yeah.
won't publish it, but we'll warn it, so any of you can, all of the board members can come if you wish. One point of, we need to provide clarity is that both of these are parent meetings, and they're the same. So some people are thinking
So
it's.
people don't need to go to both of them.
That's right, so we have to be clear,
Yes.
and so we're telling the.
And this conflict between the city's meeting on rec and our meeting is not really a conflict. It's part of the reason we scheduled two, is that we knew that there are other meetings that people go to, and it's tough the first week of school. We really wanted to get it in the first week of school because the board needs input quickly before we try to make a decision. But people don't need to feel like there is a conflict, really. If they need to go to that rec meeting or they want to go to that rec meeting, that's okay, and they can come on Wednesday, the 28th. Likewise, if Wednesday, the 28th doesn't work, they can come on the 26th, or they can send us email and, give us input as well, based on, what's going to be online for people to watch about this meeting.
Yeah. Great, thanks for.
So we will have a fair amount of new information if we have kind of reschedule what Doran Whittier
For the 4th.
did for this in addition
Yeah,
to.
and so not do a special,
Fair.
all right.
So I would just give that an appropriate amount of time,
Time, yeah.
more than anything. And I agree, we can warn it and then decide.
And we'll need to add.
So you'll add item 15 back
I'll add
on.
15, yep.
Under superintendent's report, are we going to keep Chamberlain on, just because that sort of feels, I don't know, maybe there won't be an update, but it sort of feels like.
We can keep it on.
Okay.
I mean, at some point, not at that one, but, enrollment and school opening data, I usually do that. I probably would do that as a second meeting in September or 1st of October.
Okay, everybody good? All right, we'll move on to future agenda items.
We're getting some of those on there.
Unless I hear differently, we'll just keep that list the way it is right now.
I don't know, I think it was on there. It was the exit poll survey conducted by.
Yes.
Yes.
Vince Bolduc, yep.
And just because I'm planning out, but that's how my brain works. Because I would assume that it ties into what I would be writing about. I would just hope to get, I don't know if we have a copy of what his presentation was.
We do have
but,
that, yep.
I would just like a copy of that.
Did we have that?
No, we removed it. Remember, he actually came and did a presentation?
Yes,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I
So that
I
came
don't
off
forget
the
about the
agenda.
exit poll.
Yeah.
I mean, I usually bring it back up, after we do kind of a poll analysis of how we did.
That hasn't happened every year. Do we know if that may happen again? Because that would be something you could include in your article if it was going to happen again.
Vince's analysis, that work by St. Mike's, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, with Vince retiring, I'm not sure. I think he told us that, I forget what he said, you remember? That he was interested in maybe continuing to do something, I don't remember.
Well, maybe we
And
could circle back and see if he has an intent to, and then you'll at least know that, but we do have the report, Cole.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, moving on to agenda item 14, consider the minutes of the August 7th meeting. Any comments or changes?
No, I mean, I assume since the negotiations update was due at the time, August 21st, you don't need to correct that or anything, do we? If these minutes were correct at the time.
Sorry, where is that, Brian?
I'm sorry, yeah, it's the bottom of page 4, the negotiations update. Like, the minutes are correct, it was due at August
Yeah.
21st, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think we can correct history.
What are you gonna do, yeah, right?
Any other comments, changes? All right, seeing none, those are approved. All right, number 15, consider line of credit for master planning and visioning phase 3 professional services.
So we can tell you briefly about that, but it may be best if, since we're gonna talk about it on the 4th. So we'll push this whole thing to the 4th. Any particular questions that anyone has from the last one to now that we can ask Gary, but we'll move it to the 4th. Okay?
Yes, I guess I would ask that we maybe be able to speak to kind of the scope of services and then the differentiation between the Doran Whittier and the financial advisor. Those are included in that, correct?
They are.
Okay. That would just be helpful detail.
Mm-hmm.
The door in Whittier is 300,000.
Well, I mean, I'm more of a discussion of what that includes. Some specificity. Do we have a contract to look at, or?
You guys had the contract. It's information, but we can.
We can resurface and give it to you, so you see what's embedded within the
Yeah.
services provided, right? I think is what they're asking for in the contract, right? That we've.
Yes, it's, yep.
I don't know if you would normally share a contract or just a summary of the
Summary.
contract, but some specificity of sort of what is included in that professional fee. That would be helpful. Any other comments?
Just that it's MPV, not MVP.
In the subject.
Oh.
Yeah, autocorrect is frustrating because it continues
To do it, yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that in a lot of our documents, it's MVP.
We'll call it MVP now.
It's, the other one that's
FYI.
terrible is HSA.
Has.
Yeah.
No, don't get into those, because I have a story about that, about those 3 letters.
Yeah. It is a story. All right, item 16.
When will the special meeting be for that?
For the VoIP.
For 15?
For the next one, I
16, the
think, yeah.
VoIP system.
16's gonna go on, 16, oh, wait a minute.
Well, we have to
15's
discuss it
gonna-
first. right?
15's going on to the September 4 meeting.
Correct.
The item 16 is one that is needing action. We're gonna get a little update from Amity now, but we're gonna need an action on that one for,
So let's get the update, and then we can discuss
Got
when
it.
the action is.
yep.
All right.
So this is a declaration of intent that needs to be signed by the board to allow us, once we obtain the final vendor selection for the VoIP, voice over IP phone system, we will be leasing that product. And as part of the expense for installing the phone system, we needed to do the wiring for the infrastructure as well as purchase the hardware. So we went to bid, we've done all that, those were approved by you, but what we didn't anticipate was a delay in being able to pick the vendor and cause a delay in getting the lease documents because of that. And the delay became apparent when we are eligible for a E911 grant. And so there was some information after the bid went out. I haven't been as involved as Gary in that part, but after the bid went out, and there was some discussion on whether we would host this service in-house or have it on hosted, excuse me. We would have it in-house or hosted. There became some logistical things that we needed to get more details in order to qualify for a $125,000 E911 grant. So it was pretty significant, and it caused a delay in us, being able to choose that vendor. So we haven't obtained the lease, and in order for us to legally, by IRS regulations, cover the costs of the wiring that had to take place this summer, we need to have you sign this resolution. So that's what this is. It's very complicated.
Okay.
It's very complicated, but it's basically, it's giving, the school board is giving the district the authority to add the costs of all of the project into that lease finance. So we're paying back the district's general fund money with the financing from the lease.
So just for clarity, the E911 grant came after the request for proposals were sent?
No. So the request for proposals were sent to compare and contrast a hosted system, which is hosted in the cloud by a vendor, or an on-premise system for voice over internet provided phones, right? So we got proposals, right? We knew we were going to apply for the E911 grant. We collaborated with the E911 folks, and they informed us that there were some questions about the capabilities of a hosted system that could disqualify it from an E911 grant. So we asked for additional information from each vendor to highlight their on-premise and hosted capability, and we haven't made a selection yet, but it looks like to guarantee the $125,000 of E911 grant funding, we need to have an on-premise system. So we are evaluating and demonstrating those systems over the next couple of weeks to select a vendor to provide that. That did cause like a 90-day delay in the whole process of selecting that vendor to install our phone system. So to be able to, all the switching and wiring that is part of the preparatory part of the project, we budgeted that to be part of the lease. To still be able to include that in the cost of the lease with the delay, we need a resolution with the board giving us permission to use the lease funding for that work that's already been done.
So just for clarity again, when the RFP went out, was it for either or an in-house or hosted system?
It was.
And when bids came in, were they bidding both, or were vendors bidding?
Some only bid one. So we put it back out to everyone to do the on-premise, to add the on-premise. All the same vendors that we initially asked for.
So I assume those that only bid the hosted system did not rebid?
They did.
They did, okay.
Yes, they provided the additional information for the on-premise system.
Okay, so when they responded initially, they had some reason to only respond with a hosted system?
Yes.
And do we, in order to qualify for this grant, are we giving up anything as a district?
We are not.
Okay. And is the grant offsetting the expense of the total system?
Yes.
By?
$125,000.
Well, relatively speaking, what's the total system?
Those are bid documents. I probably can't share them in a public session because we haven't made a selection yet.
Is the grant, just ballpark, is it 20%, or is there a percentage generally speaking?
Yeah, I would say the grant will cover around 50% of the cost of an on-premise.
Yeah, I just wanted to order a magnitude.
On-premise system.
So to forego
minus the wiring and the switching.
Okay, so to forego the grant would have been substantial disadvantage.
Yeah, very, yes.
That's what I'm trying to get. Sorry, that was a really long-winded question.
Would have been financially disadvantageous to the taxpayer.
Okay.
But we've been taking advantage of our E911 for, I don't know, 25 years maybe, and taking full benefit in some of those offerings. So important for us to continue to be able to do that. There's certain qualifying conditions, and we've had a consultant that's helped us with that saved us a considerable amount of money.
Other questions?
But that has to be
So,
done.
yeah, so to get back to needing to meet before September 4th, there's a 60-day window from the date of your first invoice to do with this project, that if you don't have a signed declaration giving the authority to add that to the lease, that we would end up not being able to put those expenses toward the lease, and so it would be significant.
It'll be coming out of the general fund.
Out of the,
Yes.
right. I mean, we budgeted for the payment of the lease in our budget and general fund, but not to add to it any equipment, or, yeah, the equipment, meaning the switching or the wiring, you know.
So is there any additional information any board member might need to inform an action on this?
No.
So we do have a special meeting warned for 8 o'clock Friday morning. We do have a quorum of the board. We don't have 100% representation, but if,
Is this on it after this whole discussion about?
oh, warning, yeah.
No warning, it's not on the agenda, I'm
Yeah,
assuming,
it's
because
not.
that's
We-
only the
We would have to do
Okay.
an emergency.
revised agenda.
posting, yeah.
Okay, so we can't do that
We're
for
not doing,
open
you're not doing a
meeting
Monday
law.
meeting, right? Because Monday
No.
is, oh,
So could this be a telephonic meeting?
yes. I don't know what the board's pleasure is, but whatever day works, we could do it. Is there a time frame that could work for people just to come online for a few minutes?
Do we know when people might be participating in the parent groups? I think I'm doing Wednesday.
I'm doing both days.
I intend to do Wednesday because I'm hoping to do the city on Monday.
Yeah, do you know, Alex, if you?
Wednesday. Well,
So we could warn a brief
Right before?
meeting right before that?
sure.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Would you consider, adding item number 15 to that?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Personally,
Either way.
I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that in a 15-minute session personally, but I would turn to the rest of the board.
So we'll push it.
Is there time sensitivity on, I guess I thought from David there wasn't the same time sensitivity on that?
We have professional services from Doran Whittier.
Do we need to-
Happening right now.
Since
That we're not
phase
paying
three
them
began.
for, yeah.
Well, that one in particular, we have asked for some additional information, so,
The other thing is that one is potentially more controversial. I mean, we've had a couple of questions about why are you spending this money on something that we don't know if the community is going to get behind or not. I would just be concerned about the optics of
Yeah.
putting that at a quick little half-hour session tacked onto
Yeah.
another meeting. Whereas the VoIP, I mean, honestly, no one's going to complain about us, voting yes on the VoIP lease,
grant
documents. Whereas this one, if we do it,
It's fine, we'll keep it on the 4th.
yeah, if we can. I know that's hard on Leanne and Rob, but I feel like we need to be as transparent as we can on that.
I think it's important, I didn't say it, but, we have used Doran Whittier, we've used other firms in the past, and Doran Whittier's experience with us has always been what they've given us. They've come in either at or below, so I know there's concerns around cost overruns or a lot of their projections are way, wherever they are, they're gonna come in at whatever percent. That's not been the case. Now, again, the scope of this particular project is a lot different too, so, that's a caveat, I suppose, but.
yeah, I think I'd be more comfortable on the 4th in context of the whole discussion. Okay. Nothing else on 16 then? Move to 17, consent agenda. Any questions or comments?
Nope.
All right, seeing none. Any questions on agenda item 18, AP orders 5 and 6?
I have none.
All right. Anything else, David?
No.
I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are
Thank you,
adjourned.
everybody.